like
off the camera.
Yeah.
Yes. There's something threatening about it.
I'm just it's destroying my self-confidence right now. I'm just seeing myself.
No, come on.
I like the Brit pillow in the back there. What was the deal with the scotch? Should I even be touching it?
No, it's okay. I think they said it's just some kind of hard. I don't know.
So do the
Ground rules. That's okay. We're fine with that. So back to your session.
That was today, the one you walked in on. But the one before on critical thinking,
yes,
was it okay? I got a few ideas. I'm not, but what the question I wanted to ask, and we ran out of time, and I would consider asking if I had time and I wasn't rushing off to another presentation, was, is it possible to produce a little bit of critical thought in your students without necessarily dealing with heavy, weighty topics that are, he was talking about sex trafficking and human trafficking.
Right.
And I just thought, whereas one of the guys that, the presentation I saw also on critical pedagogy, one guy just said for him, a student of his had grown up in a rural part of the country, almost like a kind of an Amazigh Arabic dichotomy in a way, where the indigenous language had been sort of downplayed and she'd been ridiculed as coming from that group of people. She was very proud of who she was, but her whole thing was, her illumination was body image, because she was traditionally thin and was mocked for it in a culture.
Oh, right.
And so her big moment of self-awareness was not, oh my God, human trafficking, like what can I do to stop that? It was, oh, I suddenly have this awareness now of the way that I was seen by other people and how that affected so much of the way that I learned in school because of how I felt based on the way people responded to me. And I never had this lens in which to understand it until I got in touch with a teacher who started asking those questions.
Okay, so you're saying,
can you...
what you're saying is what you got out of this lecture was, it's not necessary to pick these grim topics because each person that you're teaching has their own
Precisely.
topic.
Yeah, and they're going to come at it, and you have to be okay with, not okay, but it has to account for that. And his whole thing was the personal narrative is what's missing from this critical pedagogy thing. And so here's this woman who's got, and so he brought that in, and it sort of, half the people were like me, were like, yeah, right on. And then the other half were like, it's not the way I conceived of critical pedagogy was supposed to be. It's supposed to be open-ended. It's supposed to be personal.
Okay, but what do you think the presenter would have said to your response right now? What do you think if he was arguing with you? Just take his side for a second.
I'm not sure. I'm not exactly sure, but I think he might have said something along the lines of, I don't know, that perhaps I'm not sure. I think my feeling was that my students would have had a lot more to say about that than about human trafficking, for example.
Was the whole thing about human trafficking?
No, when he brought up, he was really ridiculing. He found great, stupid stuff in textbooks, like, the social habits of penguins, and, just things that weren't necessarily connected to experience. And so he was he had one about sibling rivalry, and his whole class was Chinese students. Mm-hmm. He said, well, I didn't adapt at all. I just dropped it. But he actually did adapt it. What he adapted it to was, let's talk about the policy and where do you stand in relation to the one-child policy in China. And I thought that was kind of cool, and it was something that was close to home to them. But what I'm wrestling with is there's a little bit of that tension of, I'm bringing things that I think you should know about versus just uncovering, finding out what you're interested in talking about, and then making that the material of the classroom rather than, I doubt if you did a needs analysis with students that if they talked about it, maybe it might come up, but I just don't think that it would be a likely topic. And not that they couldn't be interested in that. I do think some of what we're supposed to do as a teacher is make students aware of things that they might not be aware of. But there's a real tension there in terms of ramming your agenda down. And that's the tension that I think is the whole difficulty with critical pedagogy in general. And this is something I wanted to ask you about what you were doing in class, because when I was talking to Kenza and Fatima Zara in succession, there was a little bit of I solved the issue by getting closer to the server if I do it again with your students. I got closer to the server in the cafe. I just went outside because there was a football match going on and they never would have been able to hear me.
Sure.
But what was I just saying related to that? It's just the jet lag kicking in.
Yes.
Oh yeah, in the background and I wanted to know what you were doing. Your students were gathered around a table. And I heard this like no taxation without representation thing. And so I'm thinking, you must have been talking about District of Columbia. And I wanted to know the context in which that had come up. And do you, as a teacher, do you have some theme that you go in with and things get uncovered based on what they're interested in? Or do you have a place that you're trying to go? And do you remember the context of what was going on there?
I think the theme for most of the classes the last session involved a lot of ideas regarding student government, and it sprung out of like, what are they doing at home? It was just something as simple as that. Like, what are we taking from the class and then practicing at home? And there's what I call a kind of a Zawiya mentality in a lot of the classes where the students will just kind of sit there and watch me perform. And I think they hope that just by my charisma or energy that they'll go home with superpowers. And when I make fun of that kind of thinking, I contrast that thinking to being more involved, politically involved in your own education, and giving the administration and teachers and having parents talk with the teachers, but there's a lot more feedback. And you and I were talking to a guy who designs exams for some university. And
were we? I don't remember that. What was what?
Yeah, he was the nice guy who was sitting a couple tables down, about 8 feet tall. He sounded like he was about 8 inches tall. I kept telling him to speak up.
Was this an actual session, or was this
last night at the Say What?
Okay.
And he said that there are people above him, below him, beside him, 6 other people that are all putting these things together. So there's a real, again, I would just describe that as politics, wouldn't you? Yeah. I mean, it's a form of politics. And we have nothing like that. If a student is unhappy or bored, or they seem to just want to suffer through that. So that was the idea of no taxation without representation. We must have come up with that. It's like, you are paying into this, and yet you're also accepting bad results or bad times or boredom.
Well, okay, so this just brought me back to when I was doing ESL at Renton Technical College back in 2005, and pretty fresh off. I hadn't had that much training, but one of the activities that I did at the end was they were planning to cut funding. They were slashing the budget in Washington State, and ESL was one of the things that was going to get cut. So I had the students, we talked about how to compose a letter, and we ended up sending, I think, a composite of what. And it was cool because later I ran into many of those students in the next session, and I said, it's difficult to know whether your letters had an impact or not. We'll never know, but the fact is they rejected the idea of cutting them. And so there was this positive outcome. So there was a little bit of, here is one small way that you could do something to, and I think this is again, I do think this is a little bit of a dilemma with the culture that we're dealing with is, I mean, I'm not, I should be saying this, but just.
It's not, I don't think it can't be considered a criticism if certain things aren't available.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think it's a criticism to say something like that's a brick wall, even if maybe brick walls aren't the best possible thing to construct within.
So I'll go on a limb and just say there's not a lot of practice with civic engagement. It doesn't come up much.
No.
In the little I've seen.
Which brings us to this lesson here. Here you go. You can see that I've been taking care of this paper. Nuts and bolts, conditioning activity. So this activity right here was an example of a collectivist game rather than individualistic and competitive games.
So how does it work? Tell me this, because I didn't attend that one, and I know you guys were.
Okay, so for example, I'll say, here you go, I can place this card into your hand. And you're like, thank you. I can fold that card, right? And give it back to you.
And should I use two hands? That's a very Korean thing, right?
Yeah. Yes, and I can take this card from you and fold it one more time, and make a little tent, and then you'd say something like, "Thank you. I can inspect this now." And just be like, this is a brainless exercise. No,
was that how the game was for you though? That's how it felt to you as you were watching it?
No, I think I had ideas on how to use that. Some of the other teachers immediately were like, I don't know how I could use this with blah blah blah. And there was one woman who was just blowing my mind with talking about teaching people with zero skills, which at the ELC we don't. Everybody can read and write before they get in.
To the most part.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's a prerequisite to getting in. And she was giving me all the teacher speak about the inability of these people to even make connections between images and words and stuff. It was cool.
This was the way that I'm sorry to interrupt you. That was the way that my thing failed on trying to do Silent Way, was that I was trying to get at this whole idea of it was dealing with once they agreed on what the pictures were, they could produce language in a different way. Then they weren't thinking as much about the form, and they were just using the pictures and throwing things together, and it was very easy for them to see the auxiliary that was missing. And I was doing it for, I tried to adapt it to something else I hadn't done in class. And the reason it failed at the conference was I couldn't get them to simulate what it was like to be a beginning one learner. They couldn't do it. So I needed to do it. And I should have done it in Japanese or something like that. And it probably would have worked as a,
that's an interesting thought, is just, and I don't want to go too far off topic because we should bang on about this for a little bit longer.
Yeah.
Would be to somebody language that nobody knows and just start generating ideas on, okay, here's what they tried to do and here's how this could have been better.
Well, I'll tell you the one that I saw then in 2012, which I still remember quite well. Because, we're often drawn to things that either we're interested in or things that we think can be done, but we've never actually maybe successfully done them ourselves. But this project or this workshop was about doing task-based stuff from beginning one. Mm-hmm. And so the guy, I can't remember how many were it was one of those small, overcrowded rooms, but he did the lesson in Dutch. And the way he did it was, his goal was to teach us directions so we could use them on a map and go from one place to another. Something very much a life skill.
Sure.
He introduced the language in Dutch by giving us a magic trick that got us with the prepositions of location and direction. Mm-hmm. And there were 10 or 12 words, and we got this in half an hour. And then we used that language. He did some kind of recall thing. And then we used that. He handed us a map, and then he said, okay, go from here to here or something. I can't remember what the exact, but we had to communicate to each other with the directions that we had just learned.
Okay.
So it was really cool. And they were like, oh yeah, it can be done. It's definitely can be done. And that was his whole case. It can be done. The task is rather simple, but that doesn't matter. It can be done.
Mm-hmm.
And that there's value in doing this right away.
Mm-hmm.
And then the task complexity increases as you get out of A1 to A2 and whatever. And so that was a cool thing. There was one person in the class who could speak Dutch who found out after the fact. And so
okay.
She cheated on the.
Okay.
But for the most part, we were able to do the task. And the weird thing is, for several days afterward, I remember those words in Dutch. I can't recall them now because it was 3 years ago, and I've never used them since. But it was a little bit of that kind of immersion style thing.
Mm-hmm.
And this is another interest of mine as well that I haven't seen addressed anywhere. Is what are these immersion programs doing, and to what extent are they different? Because the weird thing is that it sort of seems to verify in some sense. I haven't done any research on this, that Krashen idea of comprehensible input, of passive listening for a while. Are the students just listening for long periods of time like they would do when they were learning their first language before they're expected to produce? What's actually happening? I've never been in an immersion program, but all I know is these kids come out and they're able to speak.
But you're teaching in an immersion program. That's what you're doing now at CASA. Nobody's speaking Arabic and French. I mean,
No, I'm saying that they're in it for 6 hours, and it's
sure.
And
sure, so you're talking about like homestay type of things.
Yeah, they're there. The whole it would be like them going to the public school, and it's all English.
Sure.
Okay, so I don't know what they're doing, and I want to investigate because this is an interest of mine. Because it seems like all this endless theorizing about how people acquire language and what's the best way to deal with it. It's like, well, just use the language around them a lot.
Yeah.
And they seem to walk out of.
Yeah.
And so
like with my daughter. I mean, my daughter. If somebody's going to make the case that it's like you have to kind of consistently have maybe one language spoken, as we do at school, then that doesn't explain why my daughter's speaking 3 languages now. I mean, there was never a focus. Like, now we're speaking English, or now we're speaking Arabic, or now we're speaking French. We just speak all of them around the house, and she's.
Well, and this is my thing about fossilization, is that I'm really skeptical about the extent to which I think it does apply to pronunciation perhaps, but that fossilization is ultimately either a lack of noticing or a lack of exposure to the language. That any fossilized thing can become
one thing that I saw today at one of Jack Richard's books. He's talking about fossilization as a result, and this is something that if any of my students are listening right now, don't panic. I don't have any plans on stopping lots of open, authentic communication. But he said that's where a lot of fossilization, by the way, fossilization is like you're making a fossil. You're getting certain mistakes are becoming the normal thing for certain students. And for those of you who are advanced students who still write things like, he do a good job, but you have advanced vocabulary and you're communicating certain ideas, but you're making basic mistakes. Those are called fossils, just like dinosaur bones. There's kind of in layers. And you can't get them out, right? Things that have been fossilized, or you can, but it's going to take a lot of hard work to do that. He's saying it's because of so much talking in class, and because of this kind of like everybody's communicating, that. And I have to admit, I have seen this with some of my students. They're very confident speakers, and they're really enjoying the class, but some of them are making really basic mistakes, and they can't kind of touch that anymore. It's so down, it's so deep, and he's suggesting that could have been because of all of the talking, without correcting it.
This comes back to that whole question then about recording what they're saying and the ways that you can of really paying attention and focusing on that, on the guts of that stuff. You can't catch everything; it's not remotely possible, but that there is a lot of feedback on what they're actually saying. Is that the door? Or is that? What's that?
A rooster being violated by
Disturbing
Chinese artists.
Yeah. Yeah, that
Poor guy. Yes.
That was the door.
You guys expecting food?
Yes.
Yeah.
Hello.
That is him. Okay.
Now, if you have any change, that would be great. Is that or some kind of, I don't know what I should tip, but tip this person.
I have a 5.
Okay.
Okay. It's always an important question to ask when you're in a country that you haven't been in either for a while or before. Is what's the tipping? What's the proper way to do it? Because that's part of.
Yeah, this is probably too much, isn't it? But I don't know.
Yeah, no, that's fine. That's 15%. I think it's not too much. I don't think it's too much or too little. It's all right. I guess I could still be talking while you were, but I think we should eat this separately and not.
No, come on, let's eat and talk. We're gonna get tired. I can feel
Yeah.
it.
Well, no, I'm already there, and I need to contact my my friends,
Okay.
which I haven't done. But so the only other thing I'll say about this, back to what we were talking about, is the notion of getting the students involved in recording what they're saying as well. And feeding back on the language. There needs to be more explicit focus on form, but that always comes after the people really rail against the idea of doing a task a second time, and I don't think. Oftentimes the students are completely interested in doing it with the language that's just popped up on the board and that they've looked at, and now they have a chance to interact with somebody else in a relatively similar task. And there's an off chance that they'll reuse some of that language. I know with all the very lexically based lesson plan stuff that I did for Tangier, I'm getting feedback from some teachers that say, hey, I'm seeing this show up. This lexical thing is working.
What do you mean? Give me an example.
Well,
like right now.
I'm talking about the way I record language in class. Everything as it comes up incidentally is always recorded in a collocation or a chunk of language. And I'm getting better and better about keeping what you're saying about Thornbury with the reading, bringing the thing of that language back as much as possible in simple tasks. It's hard to bring it back into the content sometimes, but I do it. Wasabi?
Yes.
You gotta. Do we have another? Is that the only?
My God. There you go.
Is that our only?
That is our soy sauce.
Well, do you mind grabbing another container? We'll just sort of partage the. I don't know why I'm even feeling this need to code shift or whatever. I think. Well, I've never ever taken a picture of the food I've eaten, but this might be worth sharing. Look what we're eating, right? Look what this is. What 35 with tax Canadian dollars buys. My brother's a wedding photographer, and the point in the wedding where he puts the camera down is when dinner is being served, because no one wants photos of people eating. And one of the things I like to do in the rare times that I'm at a sporting event is watching people chew is actually really a revolting kind of activity. So I'm assuming that you don't really want to watch me eat either. So I'll be doing most of what I'm doing off camera, so you can't. I'll still be talking, but you're not going to watch me eat this, because that's
Yeah.
it's going to be a bit upsetting, I think. I don't know. Maybe there aren't. I grew up in this this culture where no one made a sound when they ate.
Oh.
And so then I got to China and showing slurping, and that was a sign of showing enjoyment of the food, and very much a part of. Oh, I think this is wasabi. I'm sorry. Now I understand. That's. He's gotta chill on the wasabi there. Everything's in small amounts, right? Isn't that the sort of Epicurean approach to like avoid? It's not sort of avoid pain and not seek out pleasure necessarily. I can't remember.
I think I had a higher tolerance for wasabi.
Well, you just need more. That means your ratio of soy sauce to wasabi is that you gotta change the ratio.
Okay.
It means more of the salt. Interestingly enough, too, I don't know if you know this, but the Japanese have the longest life expectancy in the world. And I think I can't remember what I know the low. Do you know the lowest in Africa? The shortest life expectancy?
No.
Zimbabwe. Currently 39, I believe, is the average for men. Japan, by contrast, I believe is 85 for men, and it's nearly 89 for women. That's the average. The only thing that the Japanese part of the diet that those that live that long, there's a lot of stomach cancer, and they say that the theory is that from excessive salt, caused by people putting too much soy in there.
Really?
Yeah, I don't know if that's the sole culprit, but there's a lot of salt.
I mean, wouldn't
in the
it be
diet.
something with fish? Is that possible?
Well, I mean, if the Fukushima stuff is there's radioactivity going into the ocean that is all drifting over to Seattle and the west coast of the U.S. as well, and that's
somebody just told me this. Was it you? You know what most people do if they saw somebody eating with their mouth open? They're just not going to look at your mouth. So I don't even think you have to worry about it.
True, but again,
no.
That's part of the etiquette is that you do not talk with your mouth full. And so when someone asks you a question, your mouth full, you don't just slide the food to the side of your mouth and try to continue. You wait till you're finished. I usually hold up a finger like, hey, just a moment. And then that's the way I was raised. And so I have this really low tolerance for people who make excessive noise. We call it smacking. I've actually taught my students this word because it's part of the pet peeve lesson. The pet peeve lesson generates a lot of language because everybody's got one.
Sure. It's like Unit 12 and the Interchange 3 book.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. Is that the one where, like, for example, it is when, or it bothers me when?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so back to let's get, I need you to kind of push against me for a little bit here with what I got out of the collectivist versus individualistic lecture. My feeling is that it's one of those things that sounds a lot more exciting. Like we feel like you and I are Americans teaching in a very different learning environment than the one we grew up with. In other words, teacher,
Yeah.
We didn't do that.
It's like, hey, Joel, I have a, and I tell them to address me by my first name. And,
sure, me too.
And it takes a few weeks, but my joke is that when they refer to me as teacher, I then suddenly don't use their name. I refer to them as student. And then they self-correct and they say, oh, Joel, yes. And I go, oh, Wahiba. And then, it's just a little joke we have, but it works. No, and I can fix it usually in about 2 or 3 weeks. And I just tell them I understand that it's a sign of respect. I appreciate that, but I'm more comfortable with the egalitarian thing. If you're going to use my first name, or if I'm going to use your first name, I want you to use my first name. And that's usually the end of it, and it works. And sometimes they forget when they're really excited about something.
Okay.
But
Would you say that people saying things like teacher, this is a sign that we are in a collectivist?
no, but I'll tell you what the insight was for me. And it was weird. I was just having this conversation with Laura in Casablanca. She gave me this paper about the different conceptions of the self. So it's interesting that here now you're seeing a workshop that's trying to do something with that. But the insight for me was, okay, do you have students in your class that don't have books, for example?
Yes.
Don't bring a book. They never, and
Yes.
it drives me nuts because we do refer to it at least once in the class, and then they're helpless, and I have to hand them my book. But what I've noticed, and it took me a long time to figure this out, was this aspect of sharing. And I'll give two analogies with it. And one is, so you'll see one student, this is what Lotta was mentioning too. One student is looking at the book, and the other student is over the shoulder kind of looking at it as well. And my Western perspective thought the person who's got the book in front of them is the person who owns the book. It's not. It's the person who lent the book looking over the shoulder. And that's definitely different than it would be in the West.
Yes.
If I was going to let you look on with my book, dude, I'd have most of it in front of me, and I'd be making it very clear that I'm doing you a big favor by letting you look at. So that was an insight that I think is relevant. The thing I wanted to mention.
I'd like to say that's been my experience too.
And so
where I dress down a student, I'm like, why didn't you bring your book? And it's like, he's got my book.
And finally, they'll admit that to me. I'm like, oh, I'm sorry. Now I've got it. But there's a whole interesting thing to unpack right there.
Yeah, sure.
So I guess what I'm getting at from what you were talking about and criticizing yesterday was, this is an oversimplification. I think it's more interesting to talk about the ways that it does apply and the ways that it doesn't, rather than, okay, Moroccans are like this and we're like this. And
right.
The article I read was there's a whole continuum. The analogy that I use for the students that they can relate to is when we're driving along, and I don't drive that often, but sometimes I'm in the car. Back when I had a car, coming from Tetuan to Casablanca, I would see people flash the lights coming the other way. Oh, and it's this sign of, okay, the police are up ahead.
Or are the police? It's a question too. It's a question as well as an answer.
Oh, if
right?
you...
They're kind of like, hey, are there cops?
Okay, so that's another dimension that I'm not aware of.
Yeah.
But so I said to the students, and I understand this deep distrust of the police. I mean, it's, we don't even need to go into that really, but where that comes from. But this idea of, and it's almost a response in some ways, I think, to political powerlessness as well. But you're like a big team working together to undermine authority. And so when I'm in the examiner now, I'm the police, and you're flashing the lights by cheating. That's your way of. I feel like it's the same thing. You have a duty to try to make everybody aware of me in some sense, and so that means, and maybe it's not the best analogy, but
no, it's a good analogy though. It is. And
so I used to be,
truckers do that.
The authoritarian in the classroom.
Smokey
with that
Bear,
kind of stuff. Yeah,
we'll get on there. Things and
so now
try to warn other truckers about it.
Yeah, precisely. Yeah, and one of my better lessons was, here are some of the best methods I've seen of cheating. What do you guys do? And they've all got a story.
You're talking about for cheating.
Yeah, it became a show. And so, but now in class, when the exam hits, I sort of worried they are at it. It's like, you guys are ventriloquists. They can do this thing where you've seen this, right? And they all know what I'm talking about. Where, okay, there's the obvious distraction one. They bring the teacher in the back, and then they try to have somebody in the front exchanges something. But they can do this thing where they don't move their mouth, and they're giving the answer to the other person.
Oh God!
And where is that learned from? Where does that skill develop? Because every country has different approaches, though, and that's one that Moroccans do particularly well, I think. And they, they laugh about it when I mention it to them.
Yeah.
And then they go, yeah, but there's this other one. It's very, and again, that's part of the rapport thing. But they trust me with this stuff. I'm learning though about the ways that I'm not aware of that they cheat, and they're learning a few that they do in Turkey that I've seen, or Syria, or some other places.
Right.
That I've been.
You're helping them with new ways to cheat. And
some languages coming up as well. I'm not sure exactly what. It's never been a full lesson, but just what would be the language that would come up in that situation, but that they could, it's more just adding on to things. Another idea, here's another one that works for me is that kind of thing. Anyway, tell me more about this, because
Okay, learning how to function independently in a team environment. Well, anyway, that thing that you and I just did, where we had 6 people at the table, one person held the screw and maybe put a washer, a large washer, onto the screw. The second person put a small washer onto it. I was supposed to put one of those kind of broken ring things. I don't think we were assembling anything that had a function. The point was just to make this. The last person put a nut on it. And like I said, there are lots of different things you could change that for any level and have people saying things like, I need you to turn that, screw that on tightly, and using phrasal verbs and adverbs and things like that.
But didn't your brother just propose a better solution? Again, it just comes back to giving everybody a role and making sure that there's some accountability for doing it. Doesn't that sort of solve the issue right there? Sure. And you create this whole that the thing can't be accomplished without everybody contributing something. You set it up in a way that if, for example, you're the reticent, shy one who wants to let other people do the work, the whole thing crumbles if you can't contribute your part in some way. I confess I haven't done enough with that. I'm aware of it. I just mix up the groups enough that I can usually get some kind of thing that works by getting them, creating social, a sort of a classroom cohesion is just about getting them comfortable with you and then getting them comfortable in just about every configuration. So I let about 3 or 4 classes go by until I know their names. And then I do this thing where a colleague from here, actually from Toronto, who I used to work with, named Terry, who gave me a lot of good ideas over the years, just said, every 3rd or 4th class, just shuffle the deck, have them stand up, say, okay, guys, you got 30 seconds, just grab your books. I want you to work with someone else tonight. Stand up and sit in a different place in the room, and don't sit next to the person you're sitting next to right now. And the first question I ask when they sit down, they usually say, why teacher once? And I say, because I just want you to work with someone new, and I will get some different, and you do, it's shuffling the deck, you get this, it sort of freshens up everything. Sure. Even if they're doing the exact same pair work kind of activity, the fact that they're talking to someone else works. But and then they know everybody gets comfortable with everybody.
One along those lines, and then maybe to wrap this up, they showed a picture of a bunch of students facing the front of the room. It wasn't done in a horseshoe, but just like rows, and all the desks were facing the front. And they said this kind of classroom promotes individualism. You're not sharing desks. Everybody's got their own space. And whether or not there's anything to that, it was just kind of a dopey suggestion, because we can both think of very socialized, collectivized classrooms that all have individual desks too. But what I was thinking, and I don't know who has tried this or who's doing it now, I would like to just kind of put all of the desks against the wall and just let everyone sit on the floor and just stand around. Just stop going into the room and sitting down.
Yeah, you can't sit down.
And mostly because I think when you sit down, whether you're
like a mixer at a party, I mean, it'd be the same kind of social situation where you're. Anyway, go ahead. Yeah. Finish your thought, and I'll
I don't think the students are comfortable. I also think it's what they were doing all day.
Yeah. And sitting makes people tired. That's mostly what they do.
Sitting makes us tired.
Yeah.
I mean, you don't. This is the thing that very few teachers will admit, is that it would be boring to be a student, because we're sitting in these conferences, and some of the people who were involved in accepting those presenters are sitting there like, oh, they're really tired. Not because of the presenter, but just because of being forced to sit for 2 or 3 hours.
Well, this is the thing then. So the professional development idea of videoing is just put the video in the back of the room and shoot it at the front. And the first question you ask then would be, not to be confrontational, but just to get you to self-reflect, is, would you have enjoyed your lesson if you had been a student? And that may be the first question. And I think I could watch that and have the guts to say that sucked, or that I know. I think, and then then becomes what. Let's talk about then what could be done to have made that. Even if you're just dealing with the exact same material, what would you have done to try to make it work? The first thing I tell teachers is there's got to be at least one moment, and I hope it's the minimum of one, where they get up and they do something. They're looking at something on the wall. They're interacting with someone. I've done pair work where they finish the task and then they go, okay, get up now and talk to 2 more people about it. Because what it gives me time to do is listen more to the production.
Sure.
And so it's just very simple little things. And even the...
Yeah, and what I would like to see happen in all classrooms is for it to not be this, oh, that's interesting, or that's just innovative. I mean, it's just being human. It's just acknowledging that people don't enjoy being boxed up. There's nothing innovative or cool. And again, when we can move on to another thing that I'd gone to, or we can talk about one of your lectures. But the first thing that I attended was this research mentoring workshop. And I suppose what I appreciated about it is that, and we might have talked about this already, is that if you sit down and you say, today I had all of my students sit on the floor and everyone liked it. I'm going to take the class that has been really bored, and I'm going to do that with them too tomorrow. And all of a sudden, it's just like bored class, no longer bored. They really enjoy being able to just stand or move around, or jump around a bit. That's research.
Yeah.
And this is what they wanted us to leave with. It's not a matter of it's published or a professional does it, or there's a control group or there's blind testing or something. That's it. That was it might not be amazing research.
It's not something but it would encourage another teacher to try it. And that's really that's all I need I don't need research. I don't need the technical, I'm doing, I won't talk about that, but just these things where they're counting words and measuring lexical complexity by, they're using all these different words. And that's not the way it's done. It's everything we do is, I'm okay with intuitive. I'm okay with, Jamal just wrote a journal about his class and how he got a different response out of them by just changing the configuration of the room or having them sit on the floor.
Right.
Or, I don't need anything more because all along I've been going, what can I do then? Because in the Scrivener book, Classroom Management Strategies, I believe it's called, it's a really cool one. There's one where he just talks about setting up the room differently. One where they're like passengers in an airplane. So they're groups, they're 2 rows and it just got me thinking about ways that I could play with the room. I know one of my colleagues had one where they were back to back for a moment interacting, and it forced this kind of over the shoulder whispering thing, but they couldn't just show each other the materials and copy or anything. It prevented them from doing that. And I love that about it. It was just as simple, put the desks together. Nobody said, why are we doing this, teacher? And I told, sometimes I let them in on what I'm doing. I tell them why I'm doing this. I just said,
I suppose the thing that I kind of admire, though, with I guess the Scribners and Thornberrys of the world, is that they seem to have the ability to take these ideas, and they've got enough political clout to say, this is something I've done in my classroom and I've written this paper on it. And that makes waves throughout the teaching community. It's like, okay, well, I guess we should be doing this too. And I guess we should not be doing that. Like, we can't avoid this anymore. It isn't that paper that Jamal just wrote where he was writing in his diary or, on the back of a Kleenex.
Sure, true. But I'm just saying from an immediate, for those who don't, most people don't read professional development books.
No, but not reading it doesn't mean that they're not changing their classroom.
Yeah.
I mean, traditional teachers are feeling the meteoric power of student-centered teaching, of reducing the role of the teacher.
Yeah, it takes away their authority. Yeah.
So they don't need to open any of these books to have administrators telling them, it's like, this is the kind of classroom we want.
Okay, so
And so they're changing. They're being affected by all of this stuff, whether they read it or not.
I don't really want to turn into a psychologist, but it's in this forum. But
Yeah,
what's going on then in their lives where they feel threatened by a loss of authority in the traditional sense of being a teacher? Why is that threatening per se?
Well, you know about the Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. So self-esteem, community, self-actualization. Those are three things that are immediately threatened if somebody says, okay, that thing you've been doing for 20 years, you just need to stop. You like block print. Congratulations. You think the horse is an effective form of transportation. Great. It's not making a bloody comeback. but we're happy that you love horses so much. Most people are going to be riding cars from now on in, and you need to, for this school, you need to drive a car. Cave paintings, also beautiful.
But I think it's just mixing it up. It's pluralizing, as Gardner said, the guy, the multiple intelligence guy who just came in, who's also a teacher and came in recently and just said, multiple intelligences are not learning styles. But what he ended up concluding was the obvious thing of putting as many tools in a toolbox and using them. So including teaching, that can be part of the class. It doesn't have to be, I'm only doing this, whatever the Salter told me, or whatever.
Oh, right.
These allegedly sacrosanct ideas about how the classroom should be. There are a couple of rules that I don't know if I've ever really violated in terms of listening is usually a general to specific. There are these kind of general rules that we follow when we're introducing texts and lesson plans.
Sure. But I think the pair work one has to be one of the inviolable rules. You can't, or just any kind of.
Yeah, it's not all open class.
There is no way that somebody's going to be able to say to me that for 2 hours of sitting there and not using the language in a way that's surprising or unpredictable. Somebody asks you something that you didn't know they were going to ask you, and then you respond. If that doesn't happen, I can't imagine how you justify calling that a language class.
Yeah. Well, this is what the guy. That was the other takeaway from Jonathan Gill. Was that his name? The guy at University of Minnesota that did the critical pedagogy one, was this idea of, I can't remember what he was. It was something along the lines of, again, of sort of authentic production versus being a language practicer, I think that's how we refer to it. And that's really what we're doing with this PPP crap is, is your authentic production of this target language thing a sign of, is your accurate reproduction of this target language item that I've introduced in the class and we've manipulated in some stilted way, is your successful use of that a sign that you've acquired it or that we've accomplished something meaningful in the classroom? And the answer is an emphatic no. That and this goes back to the fossilization thing, but I'd much rather take some kind of meaningful utterance that you've thrown out there, something that I didn't expect, like you said. It might not have been successful, but if I've created the opportunity for you to want to use the language and then helped you say what you want to say, and then given you a chance to do something with the corrected language, successful class. And I think that's all you really need. That's the bare bones philosophy of what I'm trying to do in the classroom. Mm-hmm. It's often hard for me. I think there will be meaningful contexts, and then they don't end up being interested. But that sometimes means, oh, well, I got to think more about the way that I designed the task rather than, oh, I'm just not interested in this sort of thing. It's like, well, no, there are other things. And if you perhaps were watching me or I were watching you and we were watching an activity that bombed, we might be, that's the kind of thing we could probably help each other with.
Sure.
I'm getting way more comfortable accepting when I fail as a teacher. And it happens fairly frequently. I mean, I think
for me, it's happening so often. I mean, my students come in with their own abilities. I really feel more just like an adult daycare sitter, or young adult daycare sitter, because people who are capable were capable before I met them. I'm not doing anything for them. For students who are having a lot of problems, I don't seem to be solving any of their problems, unfortunately, and certainly not at an advanced level. I'm about to, anyway, I'd like to talk to you more about I'm going to listen to this. I want you to tell me more. Why don't you start by talking about another lecture that we attended, and then I'm going to grill you a bit about it.
Well, I should also confess that even though we've come all this way as a means of professional development, I just find that no matter what conference I'm in, I can only watch maybe 2 or 3, probably 3. I did 3 today, I did 3 yesterday. I'll probably do 3 tomorrow. And after that, I need to do something with it. I can't take in anymore as a teacher without immediately doing some experimentation in the class. Just things move slowly for me that way. I have to look at the idea and then turn it over a little bit in my head and think about the ways that I might approach it with how I am as a teacher. And then I can go back and take something else. And that's why I think that's why a lot of the teachers that are really knowledgeable about what they do and have this ease and comfort with the students and that sort of thing, they've just been doing it for so long, and they've been reflecting on it for so long that they're, and I don't know, there's a sense that I like, it's humbling because you never master it. And I've seen enough of what's being presented. We were talking about critical pedagogy. I'm at the very much the infant stage of doing. I've had lessons that I've done over a 2 or 3 day period that were very purposeful that way, and the students were interested enough that they did the homework that was necessary to go to the next step of the lesson. But I'd like the whole class to be that. I'd like all 10 weeks of that to be that way. And I know that they're not always all going to work.
Could you describe what critical pedagogy is?
Sure.
I think most listening probably doesn't.
Well, and this is the funny thing.
People could guess, but if you're making.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to distill into a quick definition, but that let's see, how do I want to put this? That your aim for your students is not this stilted reproduction of language that's disconnected from their lives, that the material of their lives becomes the subject of what you talk about. And the way that you talk about it is a way for them to evaluate and analyze and think about things that maybe, and challenge, why? They had a fairly tight definition. In fact, let me pull it out from the book, because one that Jonathan Gill came up with, which I liked, and I have it in my notes here. It was, it says, this is critical thinking, is a skill and a process for a purpose. And I would say that that's also true. You're using the language to the subject of what you're talking about is what interests your students. But in that, the teacher is not, he's just a sort of a facilitator. He's not the one handing down the knowledge that needs to be memorized and spit back later. That the students are taking in and challenging what's being said. They're doing something, synthesizing, analyzing it, and applying it in some way to their lives. And that if they're not, and I think there's plenty of research out there, I haven't found it really yet, but that just more anecdotal things of, let's see, of teachers saying, okay, when my students are talking about things that they're interested in, there seems to be this connection of them remembering the language more than they would if, you know, what the traditional way that textbooks do it. It's, oh, we want the students to practice the past continuous, and we're going to come up with some context. We don't care if it has anything to do with their lives. It's just, this is our way of manipulating the past continuous, so we're going to use it. And the simplest way for me to use the past continuous in a meaningful way is just to say, okay, well, let's talk about what we were doing last lesson, or what you were doing at this time yesterday when you weren't in class. What were you doing? And that's the springboard.
Yeah, what were you doing? That's all you need to say.
That's it. It's really simple, and that's enough. And we don't use. It's just like the present perfect. It comes up in a sentence, and then we typically go to the past tense if we want to know when and where or whatever else. It's just this incidental thing, and so to practice it in a way that gives you all of this forced practice of it, it's just a really artificial way of dealing with it, and that there are other activities that could be done relating to something that you're actually interested in. It's finding that out and adapting the material to address those needs, whatever they may be. And this is where Paulo Freire came up with the whole Pedagogy of the Oppressed book. He was in Brazil in the 60s teaching migrant farm workers, and he had some stilted textbook, and it had no relation to what they needed as students. So he said, we're going to throw this out, and we're going to let's find out what you're interested in. And you have a say in the content of because you're the learner. I mean, if you want to look at it from a business standpoint, you're the customer. So what can we do to make sure that you're happy with what you're learning in the classroom? And I don't think that covering 5 units in a textbook is a level, or it's this, we're introducing an item of grammar and we practice it and we practice it. Oh, and now we think you've mastered that. So now we're going to move on to the next item of grammar. And everything I know that about second language acquisition is this is not the way it works for people. And this is why task-based learning is such an important part of teaching, because one aspect of it is teaching to solve a problem. It could be a personal problem. It could be something where you're helping the teacher. I use that a lot. Hey guys, I have an issue that I'm dealing with and I want you to help me solve it. And we use the language and manipulate the target language in the act of solving the problem, and they don't even realize that they're doing it. And then I might draw their attention to some of the forms of what they're saying later. And I'm way more interested in that. And so what I'm working on as an instructor is, to what extent can I do this in a textbook-based class where I want the students to be able to have a lot of say in what is being talked about, and I want them to do most of the talking in the classroom. I still want to talk occasionally, and not just for giving instructions and feedback on language. Sometimes they need to hear authentic output and somebody like me who knows their level and can adjust appropriately so they can understand what I'm saying. But we're both halfway responsible for what happens in the classroom. And all I want to do is I want to think of context that my students are interested in. I want to get them excited about talking. I want to help them say what they're trying to say. And then
but that's what you wanted to do 4 days ago. How has anything that you've experienced at TESOL 2015 Toronto modify that? Or
well, I'll tell you one specific lesson. There was actually, because what I benefit from as a teacher is I don't like theory without, okay, here's the theory, that's fine, but here's how I applied it in the classroom. And so one thing that I saw, and I'm trying to remember the guy's name, he teaches at York University here, Brian, somebody or other. And he had a lesson on volunteerism. And so his objective was, I don't know if that was something he wanted to talk about or that was what the curriculum demanded, which is another tension. You know, where did that come from? Did the students actually say that they wanted to talk about that? But I know in Interchange and Intermediate 6, there's that thing about volunteering in the community. And so what he took was there was an issue of one of the local Toronto weeklies, I can't remember what it's called, and it had a whole issue on all of these organizations that were doing charitable work. And so he had the students do it as a research thing. Of choose one that interests you. Just read through a few of them until you find one that you think is doing something kind of interesting. Find out what they're doing. Go over there and ask them some questions. Have some kind of research question in mind that you want to get answered. Look at their funding. And then you come back and talk to the class about, again, what they're doing. Do you think it's working for them? Are there other things that you think they could be doing to do their job more effectively? And the example that he used was there was a place called St. Francis something or other. It's a restaurant run by monks from this particular order, St. Franciscan order of monks or whatever. But it was a whole spin on the soup kitchen idea of giving away free food. What they did was they completely changed the atmosphere of the restaurant. And the students that were reporting back on this we're talking about this, the space of the restaurant and how that affected the whole idea of this donation thing and giving. And so the place was set up like a restaurant, and it wasn't free. It was $1 for the meal, but the idea was there was a whole different sense of, it just seemed like a place that had discount meals rather than we're getting free stuff. And instead of having people at a lane, you know, in a line, kind of, you know,
right.
sort of
Yeah.
obsequiously, you know, being offered their food, the changing the space of the restaurant changed everything about the way that they thought about the experience. And this all came up just by the students going out and finding this, because the teacher had made them aware of, here are these organizations, you find one. Have you ever thought about volunteering? Well, I want you to give us a way about how you could get involved. Well, maybe that's the goal, or making the students more aware of other organizations and how easy it is to get involved.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And so you're achieving this idea of civic engagement, and you're still inviting the students to do critical thinking about it. They're sharing their results. We're benefiting from their knowledge. I'm learning from them. They're learning from each other. There's this co-production of meaning going on in the classroom. And I think that's it in a nutshell. And so what are ways of, as teachers, that we can do that? And so seeing when I asked him very specifically, is this stuff available? Could I take another closer look at it? And I wasn't sure based on his reaction. It seemed like no. But as I was saying to Jamal, most of what works for me is I've got the steps of the lesson kind of in my head. I don't have all of them, but I'm going to look at it now and take a look at it. And when I teach Intermediate 6 again, for example, I'm going to definitely do exactly that with the lesson. I know some people, I have some colleagues at the ALC CASA who they have a club that does a volunteer thing once a week. So I'm going to talk to them about what's out there, and I'll compile a list, and I'm going to do something similar,
cool.
you know.
That's cool.
So that's one.
How did the community service component, what did that have to do with language, if anything?
I'm not sure if there was a specific target language. I don't think there was. I don't think that was the objective. I think it was, I mean, I don't know if I could have asked him about that, but I wasn't at the point in the, I wasn't that familiar with the steps. Again, I think if I were just thinking about it right now, I would think about it in the steps of Unit 14 lesson in Intermediate 6, where you're describing a process.
Right.
Because I think the whole secret to activism, what shuts most people down is they go, how do I do it? What's the first thing I do? You know, how do I, and this is where I think people that I really admire like again, like Paulo Freire, or more recently, that guy Miles Horton. He's a guy the Highlander Folk School guy, who created this. His whole idea was he wanted to get people in the community together, talking about issues of mutual concern, without imposing his agenda on. He just became a facilitator, and that was always the tension of not interrupting and saying, "Oh, well, I think you should do this." But interestingly enough, Rosa Parks and Martin Luther King were trained there in the mid-50s before they went out and got deeply involved in the social justice movements that they did. And I never knew about that until I was in undergrad at the University of Minnesota, and I had a guy named John Wallace, who we had a class called Education and Social Change, and that's where I came across those people. What was my point with?
Well, no, because I was asking you how that can be.
Yes. So I was going to say that what
spliced into our.
Oh yeah. So it would be describing the process then for us about what you could do if you want, make a case for us about why we should get it, what this group is doing is addressing a meaningful social concern, what they're doing to address it that you think is effective, what they're not doing that they could be doing to make their mission in the community or whatever that is more effective. And then show us how we can get involved. Make a case for why we need to get involved. And then in the process, describe the process. And if you want to use a little present passive in the process, which I think is what the goal of the Intermediate 6 lesson is, then great, there's your target language. But again, they overuse the present passive. Flyers are made, a committee is chosen. I mean, yeah, that part of it seemed a little stilted. So if I go back and do my version of it again, I'm gonna do something where it's like, guys, you don't have to. It doesn't have to appear in every sentence.
Yes.
And we could think of cases maybe more about why.
That's something that I wonder if we ever teach our students is that a lot of the things that we teach in passages, for example, or even that kind of use of the passive, it's more like rhetoric, because you're choosing to de-emphasize one thing to emphasize something else.
Yes.
You're trying to write something persuasively, and I think for our students, they don't see it as a piece of art. They're thinking, this is a document. I'm just writing. And you're telling me that this is the kind of grammar that I should be using here. I think if we were teaching it more as an object of beauty, it might make more sense, to say something like, you wouldn't want to use this structure more than once. Mm-hmm. The subject-verb inversion is not going to look great if every other sentence is using it.
And you're going to be, and see, this is what a little bit, okay, this is the other take from the critical thing with Jonathan Gill, is he said, then error correction becomes in service of the fact that you need to make them aware of it because it's undermining the effectiveness of what they're saying in terms of persuasion or their critical thought. Their point would have been more accurately made if they had been a little bit more grammatically accurate, rather than don't seem to have mastered the past tense yet. So it's a whole different way of thinking about error correction, and that was a take for me, definitely. And it didn't come out now.
I'm sorry. What I think
I'm going to draw your attention to these errors, not to show you kind of how. What is the effect? Students, I mark up their paper and they go, "Oh my God,
Yeah, they feel bad.
Yeah, rather than.
They feel bad, and I feel bad giving them that paper.
I'm going to focus on these couple of things because, and maybe the students could get involved in this. I'm just beginning to think about this. But okay, so the students could get involved in how could the message have been more effective? How did maybe some of the mistakes that happened in the grammar or whatever undermine maybe the smoothness of the message? And what could we do to fix that? And so you're thinking about it more in terms of, it's a little, maybe this is a bad analogy, but it's a little bit like the band I used to play in. If you were composing a piece of music and you didn't like what was being done by someone else, you had to come up with a better melody. And that was your way of changing the direction of the composition. So the same thing could be done when the students are writing. Okay, and maybe at first it's a little bit of drawing their attention to the error. But what part of the message was least effective to you? And then maybe that's a way in to discuss, well, because I wasn't really sure what he was saying there. And it was very clear up to that point, but there was some kind of weird thing that happened with the language. Okay, well then let's take a look at that. And then I think the student would have much more, I mean, I'm just saying this, I haven't done this. I'm just saying that
Yes.
this is what I would be interested in trying.
Yeah.
Then, okay, so how could we what other ways could we think about refashioning that sentence to maybe make that part more effective? And it seems like it's kind of messy and it might take a while, but that it's a different way of thinking about error correction. And that is definitely something. I'm glad that if you wouldn't have asked that question, I don't think I would have thought of it. It would have just gone by and I probably wouldn't have done anything with it. Well, yeah, well, I'm all about collaboration. I mean, whether I play in a band and I'm composing music, it's all collaboration. And it's the same way with teaching. This is why I think, and I've started doing this. I've got a colleague in CASA where we're teaching different levels and we have different teaching philosophies. But when we talk together, there's very much this complementary aspect of what we're doing where, so I decided, I said, okay, I want you to plan my lesson for beginning 6. So it's like a high A2 class. And I'm going to plan your beginning 2 class, an A1 class. I'm going to give you all the steps of the lesson. I want you to go in and teach it. You can tweak it a little bit, but I'm going to go over it with you. And I want you to teach it essentially how I would. And in that process, then you can start thinking about, maybe you'll get nothing out of it. But when she planned my lesson, what I was the most valuable takeaway for me was this idea of grammar discovery and placing more of getting the students to notice the language by setting up the activity in such a way that they notice the rules more and they have more of a chance to reflect and correct each other's work. And it took a long time, but it got me thinking more about, I need to do more of that and not have it come from me. I'm still in the penny it saves time. So just kind of give them, like, let them quickly discuss the grammar rule. If they don't figure it out, then just tell them and move on. And there is value in having them figure it out and taking the time to figure it out.
There's something I'm going to try with my classes. That you're talking about things might save time. What do you think about just giving the students the vocabulary list rather than teaching vocabulary in class?
I love it.
Because
I still think it's got to.
This is something that's being proposed now as an alternative to teaching vocabulary in class. Is that you just take the vocabulary list and you learn them before you come to class.
Well, I think there are more interesting ways to do that to accomplish the same goal. But that, again, as we talked about last time, that it has to come up in the class then. That vocabulary has to show up some way now where they're going to try to apply it. But the idea then, if they've done something with it ahead of time, they've had some exposure to it. And I think that follow-up activity of, I'm not a dictionary guy. I know I should be more than I am. But this would solve that. If you want to make it a lesson grind to a halt, have a student look something up in the dictionary. So they could be doing that at home, okay?
Sure.
So let them do it at home. And then now we're going to come into class, and maybe the very first opening activity as our way in is the review activity is actually going to be the first step of the lesson. And they're going to do something with that vocabulary. So they're not just, the definition is one thing, and then seeing it in some kind of, I've just done something simple where I had sentences that related to the topic of the unit. I can't remember how I did it, but I had them on the walls and I had the words up on the, in chunks, 2 or 3 word chunks up, and they had to walk around the room and read through the questions. And the questions weren't just random questions. They were connected right to the lesson. But then they had a chance to, how does the vocabulary fit in? Can I figure out what words go here from the context of the sentence? And it was a follow-up on, I know you've looked these words up. I know you have a sense of what they mean, but having a sense of what they mean, the dictionary definition is a whole altogether different thing than seeing it in a sentence and seeing kind of the ways that it fits in.
You know what I'd like to try? along these lines, I'd like to try going a whole season without sitting at the teacher's desk, that students themselves, that they're going to run the class.
Colin that did this already. Yeah.
Just let them run the class, and I will be there to keep them on track. Make it so that the class doesn't go off the rails. That they are required to get through the book.
What can I do about that?
I wonder how that might work.
Okay, well, here's one thing that I've done, and I did a colleague.
I already know that there's going to be resistance to this, and that will be coming from parents, possibly, who see it as, okay, you're shirking your responsibility. But I would.
Okay, well, so I had a colleague and she did a writing class. It was an extra writing class, so it wasn't part of the curriculum. It just came for free, and it was a once a week thing. She did a whole thing where she somehow got them to. They didn't talk to her once about how to correct a mistake. They did it all themselves, and it was related to punctuation and composition. And it was a very painstaking process. She said at first it was very slow, but at the end, their first turn was to each other when they needed to fix something. And so she has told me that it's worked, and so I wanted to get a little bit of the materials because I'm clueless as to how this works. How do we get students to fix punctuation errors, for example, without me? Because what I'm doing just explicitly showing this, it's not working. So I'm interested in trying this out. But okay, so what happened to me though was when I review for the final and the midterm, I do this thing where it's my way of connecting the strange disconnect between the ways that we have this heavy speaking listening thing going on, and suddenly they're circling. In exam, I don't think we should have written exams. I think it's a colossal waste of time.
Or if there's a written exam, it should at least, in the same way that we were talking to those teachers from mid-TESOL last night, and the gal you were talking to for a long time.
At the end?
Yes.
Melissa, yeah.
Melissa. She said that what she got out of the genre writing workshop was that what we should be putting in front of our engineers and doctors are texts that they're going to read as engineers and doctors and have them write in that genre, write in that style.
Abstracts for people going to
right.
research and stuff. That they're going to be reading abstracts, so we got to get them used to reading abstracts.
Right. And so if there was an exam, it would be something which
tested their ability to do those things. Yes, no, that's great, sure. But that's not what we're doing in a general English class. Here we are, we're just sort of this one-size-fits-all. Even if we get a needs analysis, we can't.
If you think about it, it's because it's easy for us to just check circles and things like that. If you have to read everyone's writings, I mean, that requires quite a bit of...
Sure, no, agreed.
But what's funny is that we're content to give the students these really giant assignments, these hard assignments, but you'll hear teachers kind of complain about having to grade those same things. I mean, kind of ignoring the immense amount of work that the students are giving us, these generous, copious amounts of writing, and then it's like, oh, I have to read it. I have to read all this stuff tonight.
This is the thing of just throwing in my short story class that I did right after your 2009 workshop on using Facebook. All we did was they had done the reading ahead of time. They did the short story reading. I came in with discussion questions, and then we just sat and unpacked it through a number of fun activities. And at the end, I said, okay, now go back to any of the 10 questions that interested you now that we've done all this heavy discussion, and I want you to post your responses on Facebook. To choose one or two of them and then react to each other. I'm going to stay out of it unless I feel like either I think you're way off topic, or there's some kind of linguistic issue that's preventing you from understanding each other, and I'll come in and fix something or whatever just to provide some clarity. But for the most part, I stayed out of it. And again, it's that thing of doing the task the second time. They had way more to say about it after all of the all the unpacking
Are
of
you eating
language.
any more, or you
Yeah, I'll
just-
probably eat a little bit
Okay.
more. But yeah, go ahead. I
No,
mean,
no. You go ahead.
But so that was one way to do it, and then the writing wasn't just between me and the student. It was something that everybody shared, could react to. There wasn't a formal assignment they had to do. They were just reacting to questions. But then if I could identify natural errors that were coming up as they were attempting to talk to each other, and occasionally I'd throw a little, without mentioning anybody by name, just fixing a couple of phrases as they were talking to each other. And then sometimes they would take it and they would use it immediately in their response, and they would continue the discussion. But for the most part, I stayed out of it, but I did a little bit of correction. And when I was talking to Kenza and Fatima Zara in your class, I told them that, I don't know if you want me to do this, but I'm just going to throw up, I'll use the chat box as a way to correct. And that's, if you saw my thing, it just had
That's interesting.
the phrases, and I used it as a way to,
Yeah.
and so then so when I tutor people one-on-one and they just want conversation, that's what I do. We come in with topics, and then I may stop them and show them, but most of the time we just talk, and then
Right.
and at the end they've got a full page of collocations that here's how to say it. Here's how to say it. Okay, and now next week I'm going to ask you about some of these same questions because I want you to try to use some of this stuff. And I thought that's the way I would do the Skype thing, I think.
What's funny is that when I'm doing error correction like that in class, if somebody's talking and I start writing it on the board, for example, like just while they're talking to somebody else, they just stop because they want to see what the mistake is that I'm writing.
Yeah, it works. It's like a very
in some ways, but
Yeah.
sometimes it stops them. Like they just don't want to talk until they're done. They see what the mistake
Okay, well,
is.
here's the deal then too. It's a little bit, do you have the students that have you gotten them comfortable now where they're not talking to you even when there should be? I'm always like, and then if I'm in the wrong position, then
they'll say, "Sir, I disagree." They're disagreeing with somebody on the other side of the room, but they won't.
Jamal agrees with me, right? It's like almost like, so what I do is I stand behind them, or I'll stand in a position in the room where it would be extremely difficult for them they've got to turn all the way around, and then they're suddenly aware of like, why do I need to be talking to the teacher? And I'll say to them sometimes if they keep doing it, I'll just say, don't please talk to her. I mean, I can hear you. Don't worry about, I'm right here, but don't just sort of pretend I'm not here. But
Sure.
and that seems to work.
Sure.
But that's a little bit of again, setting up the room in such a way that you're just another person they could be talking at the mixer. Could be talking to at the mixer. I want to do this too. What would a class look like if we took the chairs out?
Yeah.
The whole room.
Well,
and if you want to sit down, then sit down on the floor.
Well, that's what I'm going to do.
But you're going to stand.
That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to tell people it's just like, if I'm not going to, the problem with anything that I do is that students, because
they talk to someone else and then it gets out that you're.
Well, no, that's not the problem. I'd prefer that everybody knows what I'm doing. I don't like it to get to somebody else first. And at this point, I have to start providing complete transparency to everything I do anyway.
Okay.
But as far as letting them sit on the floor, what I think is going to happen is that people will want to do it. It looks like there's somebody here. Somebody has joined us. Okay.
So who's that?
It's me. So it appears that we're still broadcasting. Hello, Miriam. Okay.
Her mic's off. Can she type?
Maybe she's going to try calling in a second.
Okay.
Let's see.
Oh, so see if you can finish your thought, because I wanted to get back to what you can do in the classroom, because I have one strategy, and I know that if I hand it to you.
But I know that if the girls and the guys see that, and some people don't want to do it, what they usually do is they just try to get out of the class. They don't say, they think it's mandatory. Even if I tell them, it's like, don't use Facebook if you're uncomfortable using Facebook. Don't make a video for class. Like, yes, other students. But when they see other students doing it, the pressure on them is unreal, and then they just want to get out of the class. Or they go to the front desk and they ask to, well, does he have to teach like this?
Well, could we do some sort of, again, some student training? We're gonna, yeah, guys, we're gonna. Here's the thing I did at the,
And then I'll let her know. We see her.
and then I'll get back to your helping the students run the show.
Tell me.
Well, let me talk about that 1st. But so you could do a little student thing where, okay, so when we did the module 2 of the Delta, the students that came into the center had agreed for a much cheaper fee, and this is what we could do at the center. We offered them, it was something like 50 euros in a class that was normally 200 or 250 or something like that. You were going to be experimented on by Delta people, but it's going to be, we're going to follow these units in a book, but for yours it could be, we want you to participate in some research in a way. We need to be very upfront about what we're doing. And you're going to be exposed to some very unconventional ways of being taught and interacting in the class. Go ahead.
No.
Interacting in the classroom. In exchange for that, we will give you tuition for half, and you agree to be experimented on, essentially. And you feed back at the end. You provide what worked for you and what didn't, and so they're part of they're part of the thing. And we just say, "This is are you interested in this for a much cheaper rate?"
Another thought that you just inspired me with, but by saying that is, I'm no longer allowed to bring non-native fluent speakers in from one class to another. But what if they paid to do it? The center wouldn't be able to say, it's like, okay, well, essentially like they're getting to take 2 classes or something, that they paid some small amount of money so that they could come in and coach and mentor and provide. Because the guy I was talking today said, when people slip back into L1 if they're unmonitored, and I solved this problem by having advanced students come in and sit in the groups of 6, or whatever, sit in groups of 4. People simply they didn't want to speak French or Arabic because they didn't know if the guy is going to report back to me or whatever. And so it worked. Can
it be someone within the group? Does it have to be someone from outside? That's great. That works. But
I think it probably could be somebody from inside. The problem is they have to be the class snitch. They have to be the class.
So this way, it's somebody neutral that they're not. Yeah, no, I get it. Okay.
I think even in the United States, there's that sense of that's not the kind of responsibility you want. Nobody wants to be the teacher's stooge.
No, but I've seen ways that they love to play the cops in some other situations that we can talk about. Okay, but yeah, let's just go with the one then. That's great. But just have a neutral person.
And I don't think it's the responsibility of the paying student to have to act like the class cop.
No, but they would just switch the roles immediately.
Right.
So, but no, I'm just thinking of a cheaper way if there's a way around it. Just thinking out loud. But okay, so. And this is why I love being watched all the time and when people come in, because I like to feed back. And just having someone in the room, it's almost like the effect that it must have on the students. Suddenly, I start thinking about it through how they might be viewing it while I'm teaching class. But so getting back to the thing. So this teacher said, okay, I'm reviewing for the final. I'm interested in kind of bridging in some way what we're doing in the classroom in preparation for this final exam. So I'd like all internal assessment. I think the exams as we have them as is are a waste of time, and I think they're poorly designed. But if we're going to go with them, I took hers and I changed it a little bit. So what I ended up with was a workstation thing. So in an hour, are your classes an hour and 20 minutes?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. It's the same. So they come in. I have them in groups of 6. Most of my classes are about 20 students, but usually 18 to come. And so I have 3 groups of 6, and I've set up essentially 4 skills. So I've got a listening station, and of listening activities that are related to the topics. And the way I did this is I went into New Interchange Resource Book, the older book, and they have all these really useful listening activities. You could redesign some of them, but anyway, and I put them on a CD, and I have the book room guys create a CD for me. And then I have a sort of a speaking grammar thing. You could do I do a reading writing, but now I've sort of separated the reading and the writing because most people don't want to do writing, so I make it a separate station and you have to participate. So you've got about 20 to 25 minutes, depending on if you have 3 stations or 4. You've got a number of activities, and there's just a list of them on the walls, and they're right in front of them. And then they choose what they want to work on in the existing time. So when I did this, and it's a huge, and when I did the lesson plans for Tangier, I set it up that way, and it's a huge learning curve the very first time they do it, because they sit there and they expect the teacher to tell them what to do. And I said, guys, first I want you to look at the instructions on the wall, see if you can make sense of what I'm asking you to do. I'll be right back. And then I go fix the next group. And then they just come around and do you get what's going on? When I did this as a workshop, David, the director, instantly said, have you ever thought about doing this as a lesson? And I said, no, but I'll try. And I'll feed back on what happened. I loved it. So what I did was I set up 3, again, the steps of a lesson. So it was sort of like 3 20-minute activities. But within those, there were 5 or 6 things to do. So no matter where, there was a grammar kind of thing. There was a listening, and there was some kind of like sort of spoken or written feedback kind of thing. And then we went to each one, and you could start in any one of them, and it made sense no matter where they were all connected. And the activities were set up, and it's all set up that I don't have to do anything.
Okay.
And all I do is I just say, there's like something on the wall that just says, if you need my help, just turn to me and ask, and I can come over. And then I just sort of, I'll just kind of eavesdrop on what's happening. You could do variations of that for the whole class. Now, there would be a great experiment. Teach your regular way, whatever conventional way they're asking you to do it, and then try one that way. And just do it with the same level. Do an intermediate 2 with that. This is what I'm going to do next session if David gives me permission. And I'll do one that way.
It seems like you get a lot of support for the ideas that you have. I mean,
well,
you're known
I would
at most centers for having ideas that like people are waiting to see what you're going to do. Yes.
Well, maybe
that's my impression.
Perhaps I don't know. I don't know exactly. I just but I do. I mean, it was weird that Omar recognized me. I was like, well, does that mean? Oh, I guess there's a YouTube video. I mean, maybe I've done some workshops but I don't know how you would even know. So maybe there's a little bit of that, perhaps. But yes, I mean, I've been fortunate that for the most part, I guess maybe enough people have gotten something out of them that they've looked at it as like, even though I didn't get to present this year, I was going to do something on pragmatic, communicative competence in video. And
you're missing some of the words. Well, we have the key. We have the words now.
Oh, yes. What learner outcomes or whatever. I can't remember. Ideas you can take home. And anyway, but so if you're interested, since you're using Interchange, it's perfect. I'll send you stuff that I did with that workstation format as a classroom lesson. You take it and tweak it how you want, but then you've got a template from which to sort of come up with endless variations. Okay, so let's write a couple of these down because we're both going to do this now. I want to experiment with this because I want to. This is another area of research. I want to do one, an entirely student-led intermediate 2, for example. That's what I think I'm going to teach intermediate 2. And then an entirely like traditional. I'll do the same thing I did last session, and I'll do an entirely student-led one for the rest of it, for the other one. And I'll do 2 classes, and I'll just compare them. It doesn't account for all the variables that are going to come up where that intermediate 2 that's doing the student-centered one where they're totally autonomous and I'm just there if they need help, they could be more talented learners. So it might not give me the full, it might not account for the full. Sometimes you just get that class where it just gels and they're sharp and you don't have to do that much to form that rapport. And some it's like, it never happens really. Yes. But anyway, I think perhaps we should stop. I do need to.
Give him a buzz. I'll keep talking for right now.
Okay,
until you're ready.
I'm gonna Skype with him then. Okay. Lots of good stuff coming up. I hope it's not. Maybe someone's actually watching.
Yes, kind of no, for sure there are people watching. It's on. Yeah. I'm going to tell a few other people to turn on too.
Let's see. We could take parts of this and YouTube it as well if they thought there were particular.
Well, it's on YouTube already. This is Google Hangouts, so it's broadcasting live, and YouTube is saving it. So we could just keep recording.
But just so that somebody doesn't have to go through the painful part of watching the whole thing, we could just edit.
Watching you eat.
Yeah. As I told you, dude. Like I didn't mean to. I got caught on camera a few times. And you need to.
You can go upstairs if you'd like. Okay. Check out the Google Hangouts link. Ellipsis. Ask a question. Okay, everybody. Let me look at another thing that we did today. I have to make sure not to eat this sushi.
Still a little more left.
No, I know, but you're going to eat it. So let me just move this away from my mouth. Okay. So, the other thing that we did in the collectivist versus individualist class, which ended up being a wash in some ways. I'll review it on the app. I think we have to put evaluations on. There were other problems with it too. Some of the games that they handed out had grammar that wasn't correct and missing those things. It's just, that can't be right, can it?
No, but there is a little bit of a value in seeing things that are.
No, but you can't be an English teacher and hand out things to other English teachers with mistakes on them.
No, I mean
that's just.
I mean, it's not hard to get someone to fix that. I make typos all the time because I'm developing something the night before.
Right.
At it, it's late. And
right, but this is kind of a big deal. This is up there with like lip syncing to Milli Vanilli or something.
Everybody know who that is now.
So we assembled a picture together. Each person had a different fruit or vegetable that was a cutout, and they would, from the cutout, for example, imagine a giant black rectangle of construction paper, and then tiny fruits and vegetables that were cutouts, colorful cutouts of construction paper as well, and then arranging them. So sometimes you'd have a squash on top of a tomato next to a potato, and there's a picture that you use as a model, and then you put the thing together as a group. I think there are ways to do that. We were all talking, the teachers were all sharing things. I think for early level students, there may be ways to force a desirable outcome. It's something to think about. Group creation. I think most of my students have experienced a little something like that with the reading competition games, which leads me to another lecture. I think we can just put this one to rest. The gamification. Gamification means making a game out of things that are not games. For example, reading is not traditionally seen as a game. So to gamify reading, a good example of that is when we are combing an essay for challenging vocabulary, choosing members of the other group to answer the difficult vocabulary questions, using all of the people in the group to help that person who's chosen. That's an example of gamifying reading. So, how to gamify speaking? How could we do that? Well, we kind of do that, don't we? When you must talk, and there aren't any opportunities for you to stop talking, and when you do, points are taken off. And we can see that this results in people speaking a lot more. There's a lot more talking going on. Gamifying listening. That's something that I don't think has been tried. Gamifying listening, gamifying gamifying writing. We haven't done that, but there could be collaborative writings that we could do, and there would be points associated with it. Like maybe, for example, a whole group would be responsible for writing a very good error-free paper or papers, right? And points would be awarded or taken away based on the ability to finish writing these papers. So the gamification stuff, it seems, from my experience, it's been effective, and it seems to be a kind of big deal. Gamifying things is what some of the I'd like to see some questions from. Let's have a look here. All right. Let me see. Questions as of yet. All right. Here we go. We're going to get on to the research part. This is something we could use Socrative for right now. Okay. We're going to try out Socrative, but why don't you, while I'm getting this set up.
You can do like on your computer, you can do like calls. Like there's a phone, it is hilarious. I think it's called on phone, and then you can just dial anywhere and you just talk from the computer to whatever phone number.
Okay.
Then there's like,
what's it called?
well, there's just different phone, like free phone services that you can use with.
All right, everyone who has Socrative installed on their phones, put it on now. Right?
Yeah.
Let's go ahead and have a look here. Google Hangouts, here we go. I think the most important thing, this is from Fatima Zahara. Okay, this is from Fatima Zahara. She's saying, I think the most important thing a teacher should know is that being a teacher doesn't mean you're the only one teaching. I'm going to wait for Joel to hear this.
Amen to that, yeah, I can hear it.
You can hear that?
Yeah, amen to that, man.
Okay. And this is the girl you talked to, by the way, that Saturday. Fatima Zahra. You talked to Kenza and Fatima Zahra. Yep. So she says, I think the most important thing a teacher should know, not only at the ALC, but also at school, is that being the teacher doesn't mean you're the only one teaching. Students may have great sources of intelligence and creativity that a teacher should look for and the student should unleash. A teacher can learn things from the students, not just the other way around. I also think the teacher is the one teaching is just another concept. As you already said, the teacher-student enslavement. It's more of an idea. This isn't really a question, it's just an idea that she's sharing.
Yeah, that's Paulo Freire pedagogy of the oppressed. I mean, that's the idea, isn't it? Yeah. Very much we are co-participants in this exchange of knowledge. I mean, that's in the ways that I've done it really quite easily in class are when I come in with a real problem that I don't know about the culture, and I ask them to help me educate me about it, and then we use the language in the process. Yeah, those are the best classes. Or I give them something about my culture that they may not be aware of, but they have something to contribute. And I can't think of an example right off the top of my head, but they're interested, they're curious.
Yes. Yes.
That's the easiest way to do it, I would say.
Yeah. Yeah, and again, it really boils down to objectivity. What kind of language class wouldn't have elements like Fatima Zahra's talking? What kind of class where people are supposed to be using this in authentic settings? And again, there's got to be that element of surprise. Oh, I didn't know you were going to ask me that, and then they answer. It's not all done out of the books, and the teacher should also be part of that process where the teacher is being surprised by the students.
Or the tasks are ultimately inadequately designed if that's not happening. I mean, Thornbury just talked about what he called blocking techniques. So even if you're doing a really stilted PPP conversation.
I'm sorry, what's PPP?
Oh, presentation, practice, production. So you present the language, control, practice, and then some kind of freer production at the end. Presentation, practice, production.
Presentation,
so present
practice,
the grammar in some
production.
way. A million ways you can do it. It's usually control practice of that grammar activity, then some kind of freer practice that demonstrates that they can use it successfully in some kind of freer conversation, less scaffolded conversation. That's PPP. So a million ways you can do that. But even, okay, so in that last phase of the open aspect of it, then the teacher or you set it up where the students put in unexpected blocking techniques. So at some point in the lesson, maybe somebody's buying something from someone else, like, hey, I need some running shoes, and the clerk and store goes, well, what are running shoes? Or we're out of those, or just something that they weren't expecting. And then what language do they use to try to repair? That's
right.
That's useful.
Okay.
So that's like when a lot of what we're talking about is when you're getting students to communicate in a meaningful way, you're finding out what the quote interlanguage is, what they can actually do with the language when they're not in this heavily practiced, stilted environment of just reproducing the dialogue. So.
Okay, here we go. I'm going to create a quiz right now for people. We're going to make this into a quick quiz. Let's see. I'm looking for Socrative. Okay. Ready? I'm going to ask if they're ready. There we go. No. Oops. So this is the problem with some of this stuff. The man was demonstrating Socrative yesterday, and the Wi-Fi was iffy, and as a result, there wasn't a demonstration. It seems like they should be able to bypass the whole Wi-Fi bit and just go. Everything should be Bluetooth, like some form of technology that doesn't involve. It's a little bit more of a sure bet. Ah, there we go. Okay, ready? I'm here. Okay, so we actually have quite a few people who might be ready to do Socrative with me right now. So I'm going to start a classroom. And I'm going to do it like this. Here it comes. Come on, computer. Don't let me down. And it's not going to. Not now. Okay, so our classroom number. Copy. Hey. Hi, you are being broadcast right now. You're aware of this. So don't say lots of bad language or anything. Yeah. Okay? You might want to, but since this is being preserved forever on YouTube, Only including language. Now I can't hear you, but you can hear me. Well, say something. You don't have a microphone. Okay, I cannot hear you. But I'm about to set up a Socrative classroom. So here we are. Copy. And is there a kind of decent late night-ish grocery store near you?
What's that?
How long does the metro stay open?
The metro that's down there is 24 hours.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Huh.
There's a metro that's sort of closer, that's like on Google.
Okay.
It's like that's even closer. I think that closes at 11.
But that one that's kind of down just a little way.
Down there, it's 24 hours. Yeah.
It's a corner store.
Yeah, well, it's front and
Yeah.
Yeah, that's all. That's 24 hours.
And it's nice. I was just there the other day.
Yeah, it's decent.
Yeah.
Out of that, there's metro there, but then you go to church, and so Church Street is the next major over, and then you went a couple blocks to like Wood Street. So
Okay.
There's like a huge Loblaws there. Close out of that, it's the better grocery store.
Okay.
Sure, it closes out.
Yeah, I just wasn't sure what's available at later on. Okay. Here we go. Post. We'll go here. Get rid of this. Is there a reason I can't hear you? Okay, I have just posted the room number on the Facebook page if you want to type it in for Socrative. And I think the problem with this is I don't know how many people are watching this right now. But I think it's going to be useful in conjunction, like multiple students or multiple members with Socrative logged in, and I ask a question or questions, and those are answered there. So. Mm-hmm. Nice. Okay, let's see. Got that. Here. Now I see two things that look like chat. Does this writing appear? The first part I heard you talking about was deleting exams. Do you really think that students' production will get better without any pressure? Joel?
Yeah.
Do you think that without pressure, if you get rid of exams, I don't think that's what Joel was saying. He wasn't saying delete exams. He's saying delete exams as they exist now. The whole multiple choice, gap fill types of things. Those aren't. They're not adequate to showing what a person can do with a language, right? And they really do reflect a passive understanding of things, and some of it's just guesswork. I mean, a lot of students will be able to put certain words, like if you have 6 out of 6 words, it just becomes a matter of deduction. You say that word doesn't look like it could fit there.
Yeah, it's what we call discrete item grammar testing versus performance testing. Performance testing is something that would theoretically mirror a real life situation and would be something that was very similar to what you're doing in the classroom. But instead of speaking, now they're writing it, or it's just the medium by which they're reporting to you is different. But it's what you're doing in class should mirror what's happening. The activity should be very similar. And this is the disconnect from it. But if you insist on an exam, I'm talking about an internal assessment where I just tell the class at the beginning, I'm going to be grading you sometimes, and I'm not going to tell you when it's going to happen. But when I'm hearing pairs and groups, I'm going to listen to what you're saying, and I'm going to evaluate it. I'm not necessarily going to share it with you.
Yes.
At the end of the 10 weeks, who is a better judge than you to know what their skills are and what they can do and what they can't do? I mean, does the exam ever tell you anything that you don't already know? I would say 9 out of 10 no. It merely reflects what I already know, and I've spent 2 hours grading it. For some students, it gives this sense of closure, and maybe there's a different way that we could establish that to give them that sense of closure. And I think that would be some way of sharing what they did and demonstrating what they did in a format like you did with online with Skype, where that woman made a video. I can't think of anything that's better than just demonstrating what she could do with the language than making a video about a topic that you had discussed in the class that they were interested in. Why couldn't that be the evaluation? Make your 5-minute video. Show me what you learned. That's the question. Tell me what you learned in the class.
Yeah.
You got 5 minutes. Structure it any way you want.
Yeah. Well, okay. Which kind of brings us back to this, right? To the TESOL research. What is it? And even so, at this point, I could say that approach appears to be, and the students will agree, it's a more effective way of determining what they got out of the class. Can they use any of these things? And some of them are quite hard on themselves. They just say, they've been performing at the same quality level. They're hoping that somehow that's going to get, that'll break. But if the testing simply consists of a lot of guesswork, wow. And you just appeared, and I heard you for a second, and then it went away. I don't know how that happened.
Can't hear?
I can hear you now.
Yeah.
Yeah. Switching between the two. Why don't you just use my set? Because I have.
You can do it once you're
Yeah. So this is interesting. It seems like Miriam, when you talk, it's switching the camera over to you. Okay. Yes.
Okay.
Oh, right. Say hi to Miriam.
Hi, Miriam.
Hi, Joel.
He'll be back in a second.
I was going to make a call.
Okay.
But to you, for example, you're a scientist. You're a medical student. What is research? How would you define research?
Like research. Do you mean? What do you mean by this? Well, research is when you I think that it can be in two cases, right? Like when you don't know something, you have a theory, and you do research. to prove how true your theory is. So your theory is going to be either approved, confirmed, or not confirmed, as a research. But then there's this research thing as a mere word, like when you just research something that you don't know. But why is TESOL asking about research? I don't understand.
Why is this so important? Well, we can see that if you get a paper published and your paper influences one of the ESL greats, one of the stars, let's say somebody like Scott Thornbury or Jack Richards, the guys who puts together the interchange books. If you can influence these people with your research, that has an effect. It's not an ignorable effect. Yes, there are still a lot of teachers that do not want to change, but they are changing. They are changing. It maybe not as fast as you'd like them to, but it's quality professional research that proves what you already know about what makes an interesting class for you, what makes it an authentic class for you. And when linguists and ESL professionals publish their work, that has a positive effect. That's why it's so important. Now, if Jamal finds a napkin and writes down his ideas on the back of the napkin and changes his teaching based on some of the ideas that he wrote on the Kleenex, that's also research. But it's not going to make waves. It's not going to properly influence. Even though you can say, "Oh, but it's true." It's like, okay, it's true, but there are channels that research it seems. Okay, good. And we were talking about what she was asking. Why is this so important? The whole issue of research. And
What sort of research?
any research. Just like, why is this topic being bounced around?
Well, you pointed it out just a moment ago, right? That you said that, again, if it's research and a certain name, then it carries weight.
And it does.
If I say, even if I write fairly well and I write a paper about this, no one cares because no one knows who I am.
But they'll care once Scott Thornbury quotes you.
Yeah, if Thornbury or Scrivener or Penny or Diane Larson Freeman says, "Oh yeah, if I see my name Hansen 2015, then I'll know."
Yes.
I've entered the it's kind of a weird way of doing things in a way. I mean, when you think about that.
I think that's what they're trying to say, is that it's a weird way of doing things. And maybe the point of this lecture was to say, maybe we need to kind of join arms and start opening up ideas on like what research, how we can collect data and share it and allow it to change school policies without it having to go through ESL superstars.
Okay.
Maybe that's what they're saying.
I think
Because after, like, for example, this is something I wanted everyone to do with Socratic or Socrative, but I'll let Joel talk to you for a little bit, or maybe ask her. She's a medical student, so she has quite a bit of experience doing research herself.
Well, I missed the first part, Miriam. So you'll have to. I guess my first question would be, what made you want to join the discussion tonight? Start with that. Was there something that one of us said that you thought, oh, that makes me think of a question that I'd like to ask?
No, she's gonna say, No.
Well, when
$5. Just something like that. Yes. No. That's what I wanted to ask. Where's my money?
I mean, well, at first,
There's a deep thought like that.
Yeah. that's
There's a
not.
deep thought
Yeah.
like that
Yeah.
where it says, I hope that
Okay.
at the end of my life people say, gosh, that guy owed me a lot of money.
I'm sorry. Anyway, I didn't hear what you said, but is there? Can she type as well? Can you type as well?
She can.
I mean,
And that's cool because I saw it up here.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, see? Group chat. No, it's up there. Yeah, we can see this too. In case you wanted to. Do it that way.
okay.
I think the problem with
But
this
can you hear?
watching on YouTube, I don't know if they
Okay.
get to have that appear on the screen or not.
Okay.
Maybe they do.
Well, I can always. It's like when
Sure,
you
sure.
can't hear in the presentation. It's like, oh, did everybody hear that question? No.
Yeah.
Well, okay. So I'll do my best to paraphrase. So yeah, type. If you can type it, Miriam, that would be great, and then I'll respond.
Okay.
No, not really. I mean, sort of vaguely, but not enough to pick out what you said.
Okay.
Yeah, especially when your ideas are complicated. The microphone's a little bit choppy.
The other thing I was going to say about the exams in International House, at least the one in Barcelona where I did my my Delta stuff, they have open enrollment, so the students decide when they want to go to the next level.
Ah, okay.
I think there might be some consultation with the teacher. Like the teacher has to, I think, approve it, but the student kind of decides. Somehow it works for them. I just think. I remember in Tetuan, I remember parents coming in and complaining because their kid got an 84 on the exam. And I did. I said, "What do you think? Why is your son or daughter learning English?" And I said, "Well, they're planning to go abroad. Going to the UK or whatever." And I said, "Okay, cool, but my guess is that when your son or daughter is on the street speaking the language, no one's going to remember that they got an 84 and it's going to be a 3 or whatever the class was. But they're going to ask your son or daughter a question and make a choice about how effectively they can answer it."
Mhm.
And that, you know,
So speaking of research, let's say that. Miriam's question. So you can't hear me. Well, the first thing I heard was about deleting exams, and I thought that was interesting.
oh, okay.
That's what I wanted to ask about first.
Okay, so I just finished another session in Casablanca, and I find, well, first of all, what percentage of the grade is the exam?
50%.
Okay, in Casa it's 30, and for me as a teacher, I just find it essentially the word I would is sort of a perfunctory exercise that it doesn't tell me anything as a teacher. First of all, because I don't think the exam, it's easy to mark, and that's why teachers like it, but it's not testing anything, and it's not telling me what the student can do. And ultimately, as an instructor, I already know what the students can do because I've been with them closely for 30 hours of classroom work. I've got a very good idea of what they can do and what they still need work on. And I've figured that out because I've been paying really careful attention to what they're doing and saying in pair and group work and body language and what they write to me when we're doing writing assignments. And I do give some quizzes in the middle of the but the quizzes are as much for me as a diagnostic to say, oh, if they're still struggling with that grammar point or producing that language, then maybe I need to do a little bit more as a teacher to address that. So it's as much for me as it is for them. But I just find that, again, the exam's not telling me anything that I don't already know. It just seems to be this, that the students are used to them, the parents are used to them and expecting them. But other than that, it just seems like this, and the students take it so seriously too, even though it's a very small percentage of the grade in our center. Whereas if you just, there should be no anxiety for the exam. If you've come into class and you've done the pair and group work, the exam, and I tell them this, the results will take care of themselves. So why should we bother with this anymore? Why can't, if you want, I mean, I could just, again, my idea was just complete continuous internal assessment where I just pick certain days, and I might tell the students or I might not, I'm going to assess you today, but I get better results when they don't know that I am. Because then they have to take all of the speaking activities seriously because they don't know when I'm evaluating them and when I'm not. So I want them to put equal effort into it, because if every day were an exam, the students would take the work more seriously. They'd be more into it. And so why couldn't we kind of create that idea of every day is an exam in a sense, because you're picking up new language, and it's your commitment to speaking and participating that our hope is that the language follows, that you do end up learning some of the structures that are in the book or that are coming up in the context of the parent group work. So do you see what I mean? Does that make sense as an argument for why we shouldn't have them?
I'm gonna type it.
Okay.
It's interesting.
Just realized I haven't been drinking enough water today. So that's, I always have this in my class, so it's always with me in my backpack, and except during Ramadan. Then I hide it, but my other controversial statement is I feel like Ramadan is harder on the people who aren't fasting. Okay, so
Really?
yeah, because you have to tiptoe around it. You have to be very discreet if you're not fasting, to kind of hide it from the people that are. And so I drink a lot of water in class.
Okay,
So when it's Ramadan,
comfortable.
I keep it in my bag, and then like during the break I'll go into the toilet or something and have a little. And it makes me feel like I'm doing something wrong, and I don't know. Anyway, that's another conversation. Anyway, okay, so yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I would say that part of what the difficulty of doing this is that people say we've done it. This is the way we've done it for forever, and so why they think they're getting results. And I'm just saying, the reason I'm saying all of this, and that I didn't mention in the conversation tonight, was what's happening to me is when I'm teaching classes in the upper intermediate level, and I'm very interested in this question, why do I occasionally get students who, it seems to me more and more, where I get students at a high level they're in intermediate 6, and they're not really intermediate 6 anymore. They've somehow artificially gone through the levels. And my own feeling is that some of this has to do with the fact that the exam isn't really measuring what they can do. And the kind of exam that would measure what they can do is something that takes a long time. It's messy to grade. And teachers would hate this. And so they like this little ABC marking thing, but it's not telling me what the students can do with the language. So we could make an exam that could do that, but I don't think people would like it because it would take a long time to grade, and for that reason alone, a lot of people would reject it. Yes. Okay, but I joke about this as well. Where if you want to get serious, there, maybe I shouldn't admit this, but there are things we do. You may know this as a during the exams. Does Jamal move the students around before they so you're not sitting next to people you're always sitting next to? Maybe I shouldn't confess this, but I'm going to confess this.
I mean, he changes the.
So what I do is there are two things you can do. I don't make the exams, but when I was teaching in Turkey many years ago, I did. And the thing that we did is we created 3 different versions of the exam. So everything was out of order. So it made it really difficult. But my friend had an even better idea. He said color code the exams. So make, in addition to having, it's a lot of work, but you wouldn't have to really care about cheating anymore because there would be no way to do it effectively. So you take the exams, and some of them are red and some of them are yellow, and the students are under the impression that the red exams are all the same exam, but they're not. So even if you do 2 versions, like half of the yellow ones are the same and half of them are not. And so if a student looks over and thinks that the exam, the red one next to him, is actually the same exam, it's not. And that would solve that thing. But then the second thing is, as a teacher, and again, maybe I shouldn't, students know this, they're sort of vaguely aware of this, but I take the ones that I know are going to cheat and I put them right in front of me. And I put them right next to people who I know, even if they cheat they're not going to get the answer anyway. But then you can set up the test. You can set up the test questions in a way that make it, if you don't have A, B, C, D as an answer, then it's much harder for a student to share, hey, what's number 4? Oh, it's an entire sentence, it's way harder to cheat. Oh, number 4 is C. I mean, that's the one that's easy. And the thing that my Moroccan students do better than anybody else that I've seen is you guys can say stuff without moving your mouth. And I don't know how you do it, but it's incredible. Like, they'll just be, one guy's kind of leaning like this on the desk. and Jamal's like, the person who wants the answer. And I can somehow communicate to him, and I hear this kind of, I can tell as a teacher that something's being said, but I can't do anything about it because nobody's head is moving. There's just, I know something's said, and if I know who said it, I'll just say, I'll make eye contact with them and laugh about it, just to let them know that, hey, I'm aware of it. But I try to set them up so they're cheating from people that aren't going to help them really. And the other thing is, if the exam is set up where you almost don't have enough time to do it, then it's harder to cheat, because the students, most of the cheating happens at the very end, when they've got too much time and they're kind of sitting around trying to help each other exam at the end before they've handed anything in. So when I do quizzes, I have a really tight word limit, so you have to, or time limit, so you have to produce really quickly. And then I find that the cheating is also minimal that way. But yeah, there's a very different attitude about cheating. There's nothing dishonorable about it. It's like you have a duty to help each other out, and that's my perception of maybe this is part of the collective self. But anyway, did you say there? Oh yeah, okay. Yeah, I want the students to prepare the language without. Could they be motivated to prepare for an exam that doesn't happen. You know, like that you care enough about the class that you're just reviewing. I try to give my students strategies for, here's one thing I do when I'm working on my French, or here's something that, so the activity becomes, this is one way that I've used to learn the language. Do you want a copy of this to practice? Here you go. It's yours. Use it if you think it'll help you. Otherwise, you know, find something else. But all of my review activities are set up that, as a strategy for the students to prepare outside of class.
Miriam's actually
okay.
good. What you were saying about the fact that they start making plans to cheat in advance.
But that's review. There's some value in that too, because you're getting review out of them, even if, you know what I mean? I watched this guy. I mean, this guy, my friend Yazan in Syria. I was teaching in Damascus about, I guess it's 9 years ago now. But he went. I mean, a Syrian guy who went through the system.
The medical class, her anatomy professor said that exemption.
And why exactly? Oh, for the rampant eating and that sort of thing. Yeah. I kind of like the I like the idea of a 5-minute oral exam. I mean, a lot of teachers, I know some directors resist that because they say, well, you've been assessing them the whole time. But I've been assessing them with these specific tasks and not necessarily a holistic overview of what they can do in the language. That's not happening in parent group. I'm getting this little slides.
Yeah, this. It just means progress is communication. This is a progress.
Yeah, that's true.
I don't know if you want rid of everything. If anybody's performance. I think
There's another research.
That's a good question I could ask you. Would you, because she was an excellent student, she's graduated. Would you seriously not have learned the vocabulary for, let's say, Advanced 5 if you knew we would never have quizzes and exams and that we wouldn't have a final exam? But you wouldn't have learned anything unless there were quizzes and
No. Because we were practicing everything.
Yeah, we were.
That we were doing.
We were practicing.
And hopefully in context that you remember. So I remember in my French classes, the ones that I remember the language from were ones that were tasks that were classes that we were doing something that felt really meaningful and purposeful. And I associate the vocabulary with that context of the class. And so when I ask the students, my easy review thing with the students is I just say, what were we talking about last class? And I've at least gotten them to understand that they no longer say, oh, the past continuous. They're no longer looking at it grammatically. They'll say, oh, you were asking us about our favorite place in the city that we like to go and hang out that a lot of people don't know about. And here's why we like to go there. And then I might say, okay, and sort of what language came up. And they might be able to tell me. But it's that's like the quickest way to review as well, some of the language. And my hope is that some of the contexts are something that they really liked. And that the hardest part as a teacher is that that language has to keep coming back. No matter how much you review at home, you've got to have other chances to use it in some way in future classes. And it's hard to do that when you're pressured to cover units in a textbook within a certain time frame. And as a teacher, recently I was back in my hometown teaching in St. Paul, and so it's an ESL environment. They can walk out of the classroom and they're surrounded by the language. So it makes things a little bit different. But the school gave me the freedom to, the students told me we came to an agreement about what they wanted to talk about. And it was a 4-week session. and we picked the top 4 topics that they were interested in, and I just found material wherever I could. YouTube, things in the newspaper, wherever I could find that I thought addressed the things that they were interested in. And many of them were very practical things that they would use every day. So one was hospital language. I have to go to the hospital and talk to them about a problem and get admitted to the hospital, what language do I need? And I found something for that. But I could go at their pace, and I could recycle as much as I want. And we covered less sort of traditional target language of certain structures, but things would come up together, like holistically. There were multiple tenses coming up like they were in real life, and the students weren't freaked out by that. And I think because of what they were talking about was meaningful to them, and I was doing, I thought, a pretty good job of recording that language. Every class ended with 12 to 15 to 20 phrases that were things that they had generated that were on the board that we had looked at and fixed and tried to use in the class. And I said, this is what you said. This was my motivator for them, was you guys said all of this. So the more you speak, the more language is going to be available to all of us for you to walk home with. And at the end, I was always reviewing, and they would take pictures of the board, as would I, and I would take that language and find ways to bring it back in future lessons. So I determined the content in a sense, but they told me what they wanted to talk about, and I just fashioned things that I thought would interest them. And that's the kind of environment, if I ever had my own school, that's the kind of environment that I want to create. The students should, from day one, if you were teaching someone Arabic, what's the first? This is grammar translation. This is Thornberry. It's like, if you were teaching someone Arabic, what would be the first thing that you'd want to, like, you'd ask me as an Arabic instructor, and I'd say, well, okay, maybe I want to know how to introduce myself or meet someone, or I want to know what to say to someone to start a conversation, or something really simple. And then you could say, well, okay, well, how do you say that in English? And then I would tell you, and then you'd say, well, here's how we say it in Arabic, or here's one way we'd say it in Arabic. Let's practice it. And then you've got, it's just one way of doing it. Okay, so okay, that's interesting too. This idea of stressing over. Oh, there's more down there. Yeah. It's weird because it doesn't break up the. There's no space between them.
It's always useful to learn.
I think you have all the makings of a teacher, Marion. You're asking all the to me all.
We're sorry.
Yeah, maybe you have far more large ambitions than
She does.
But no, I like the questions that you're asking. This is just something that okay, it's always useful to associate everything we're learning to something close to us. I hope some other teachers are out there watching this, because
Well, they will.
they need. Yeah, no, okay.
Oh wait, that's not true. Jackie from mid TESOL, you can thank her for the party last night.
Oh yes, thanks, Jackie. That was excellent. I wanted to stay longer, but
That's Rebecca.
Okay. But yeah, okay. So I just maybe that's the next workshop. Okay. So I'll take your words and I'll say to the title will be associating everything we're learning to something close to us. How to do that with existing textbook material, or having the courage maybe to throw out the textbook now and then when it's not relevant, and maybe find a way to get the students using that language that the book says that they want them to learn, but in a more meaningful context. And sometimes that's hard for teachers to figure out. But a lot of what I'm trying to do, and I know Jamal's trying to do, is the reason I created this whole idea of making a lesson plan for every day of every class, which I did for Tangier, is that I wanted teachers talking about what they were doing and improving upon what people were doing. So I thought if I provided a lesson plan, then someone, even the people who don't like me, could just say, yeah, okay, I can do better than that, and great. Then you've already achieved what I want to achieve. Because most of the professional situations I've been in, teachers are bizarrely guarding their material. They feel protective about it because they feel somehow maybe it gives them some professional advantage. Whereas I'm trying to break that down. I'm very interested in, if I have a great idea that worked for me, I wanted to share it with you, and I want you to reciprocate.
And I think it doesn't. I think if anything, yes, there are some students that will say, "I love that teacher's class, and I love that individual style." But maybe just as often, students are so because the wealth has not been spread, and other people are not aware of what that teacher's doing. They're just shocked when the student comes into the room and says, "This is just weird. I don't like this." And that's really another result of the is being protected, is they're getting students accustomed to a certain particular style that they're not sharing with other people. And then they're releasing the student into another learning environment that is kind of insulated from the
Yes, well, this is, and I don't really want to name names, but this is a little bit of the fault of, this is the fault of our institution, because they should be doing a better job. Where I know students have preferences for certain teachers. That can't be avoided. That'll always be there. But if you're walking into Jamal's class, or you're walking into my class, or you're walking into someone else's class, there shouldn't be that much of a difference in terms of the things that matter. Where in terms of, you should still be doing a majority of the speaking. The teacher should be essentially a facilitator. They might just be going about creating the facilitation part. They might be doing that differently. That's great. But another thing that I think would break that down is, for example, two things. One, I would love for him to come in, if we were teaching at the same center, I would want him to come in and teach my class. And I could be there, I might not be there. But otherwise, I'll go in and teach his class for a little while. Our other idea I was talking about before is, I have colleagues where we share information, but I also have colleagues who I have them plan my lesson periodically for me, just because I don't want to do it the way that I would do it. And instead of me having to watch their class, I can see how they might design the same material, and the 2-3 times I've done it, I've learned something every time. And so if the teachers are just sharing a little bit more what they're doing, I think the students would also benefit, and there wouldn't be this great jump when you're going from one class to another.
Yeah. And again, that's where, and I'm not trying to beat this to death, but it seems like this is where research is the kind of neutral glue that puts these two disparate elements together, that puts these two different teachers together. They say, for example, 100 out of 100 teachers who examined found that working in an environment where lesson plans were being shared and were thoroughly understood by each other, it created a more positive work environment. Students felt less disorientation. And then at the bottom, it's like, Hansen, York, Morelli, Sabor, 2007.
Yeah, well, this is what my friend Aman
and then when Scott Thornbury presents that while playing on a giant piano or something.
Well, so my friend Aman in Tangier is a friend of mine, and she said to me after the lesson, she gives me the most feedback about, because she's in Tangier, sometimes using and improving upon the lessons that I created, and she comes back to me, and this is what I did with your idea, and I go, oh, cool, never thought of that, I'm definitely going to use that. And so I get benefit from it as well. But she said to me, okay, you've got the rest of the Delta, you've got Module 3 there, now you just need the justification, so you just identified it. I'll do some kind of quantitative research with the teachers and say, for the ones who are using the plans, and saying, how has this helped you, and in what way, and have you noticed any difference in the way the students are? Mark, the director, has certainly said he's gotten different results out of the teachers.
Sure. I was saying that, but I was also saying this kind of the meta observation. by people sharing with each other.
Yeah.
And by teachers sharing with each other, it creates this type of workplace. You were describing a kind of toxic work environment where teachers are not sharing.
Yeah.
They're guarding their work. And
saying bad things about other teachers that are doing things that they've never tried and putting them down in this weird gossipy. I mean, this is another conversation, but I just wish people were. My unproven theory is that if you're living a life that's fairly satisfying to you, you have a lot less time to worry about what other people around you are doing, and that's just my hope for everybody, is that people would gossip less if they had more going on in their lives. And I just I think this is much true for some of my colleagues. And
what if you have a lot of things going on in their lives, like gossip?
well, okay, yeah, I'm saying maybe finding that thing that makes you feel like getting up in the morning. You know, and that's the.
Which could also be gossiping.
Yeah, I guess you're right. I got it's but what's the Maslow what's the top thing? What's the top in the hierarchy? It's creation, isn't it? Isn't it like
self-actualization?
Oh yeah, no, I'm getting it mixed with the taxonomy. Sorry, I've been mixing in my head. But yeah, self-actualization through gossiping. There's our fake TESOL. There's our fake TESOL thing. We turn. As critical pedagogy. Wait, let's write that down.
Yeah, it's a good one.
Gossip.
We're trying to think of presentations that are just evil and wrong, but we're going to find a way to make them acceptable next year. We're going to use all the right and all of the proper buzzwords and just see if it's possible to get a presentation based on that kind of looks like the kind of thing.
Good luck with that.
Even though the subject material has to be, if it's going to be funny, it has to be objectionable. I mean, we can't promise anything that any reason that there's any want, but it'll have all of the catchwords.
It's just two things that are completely contradictory, like gossip as a means of applying critical pedagogy in the classroom, or using gossip to foster. It's usually really divisive rather than bringing people together.
Yeah. Building bridges. Building bridges seems to be the common one.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry. People do gossip when they have nothing to give. When they're also the best they can do is gossip. You're getting them way out of their. Yeah. Okay. So this is another question that I'd like to ask you: is why do you think it is that people feel so threatened by this desire to change things? I just find as a teacher, in addition to the fact that I'm never really ultimately, this could be a product of being, coming up from an American culture where we seem to be programmed to be never satisfied with anything. But all I can think about as a teacher is what keeps me interested in it as well, in addition to the fact that I'm really interested in what my students are doing in their lives, and that becomes the subject a lot for the material that is in class, I'm acutely aware of my limitations, and whenever I go to these conferences, I'm just reminded of all the things that I'm not doing that I could be doing. But rather than being depressed about that, I just see it as look at all the stuff I have left to try to make sense of and understand and try to use in the classroom in some way that's meaningful. I find that mostly a great thing, and that's what keeps me it's endlessly creative to be a teacher and to find ways to connect with your students. And this is one of the reasons I think I'm still doing it now 15 years on. And I'm not sure if I'm any closer, really. I feel like I'm a little bit more comfortable in the classroom. But I'm just as
well. Okay, I'm not trying to lock us into one particular conversation, but if we could just steer this, what you're saying, back onto the research on ramp, and that's regarding data collection.
Okay.
Now, for 15 years of teaching, what kind of data do you have about performance, student performances? What kind of data have you collected you're capable of making predictions with?
Probably not nearly enough of it, I would say. I
And
mean,
how do you collect your data?
mine is mostly just feedback stuff at the end. Things that you thought were effective. What was the most meaning? What was to me, to you as a student, what was the lesson that stood out in your head and why? What do you feel like you got out of it? What would you like to do less of? What would you like to do more of? That sort of thing. And it's hard because I remember the first time I did it, I got some really harsh feedback that I thought was extremely unfair. I mean, most of it was, what's the worst thing that someone's written to you?
God, I don't even want to repeat it.
I'll say mine if you say yours. Or,
Well, I can't. I'm trying to think. Well, I got worse ever.
really? Okay, so mine was an intermediate 2, and this was right after I finished module 2 of the Cambridge Delta, and I was sitting there, and every time I come across something new, I feel uncomfortable in the classroom because I'm second guessing what I'm doing, and in some sense, teaching is quite easy. But we get off that, and we over-intellectualize things. But a student said to me on the feedback, we wasted time with bad activities. And I was really hurt by that because I really felt like I'd put a lot of effort into keeping it dynamic and not letting people move on. And it took me a couple sessions before I started asking their opinions again because I was so crushed by it. And I don't take
no more opinion.
I don't exactly. I can't take it. And so I took. I just pulled it away for a while because I'm like, my confidence is shattered right now. And and it was just one student out of 7 classes, but it was that says a little bit more about my psyche, is that I focused on, rather than just go, oh, that's one student and maybe they misunderstood what I was doing. I ignored the other.
What they meant is they really loved. They just. I don't know.
We wasted time on bad activity. That's pretty harsh.
But now, in retrospect, it probably didn't hurt you as much.
No, it doesn't, because I'm far more of my worst enemy than any other colleague could be. The worst thing that's ever been said about me. Well, maybe not, but I've probably said something worse to myself. And now I'm kind of learning how to be kinder to myself about my mistakes, because I'm earnestly trying to get better.
If I got something like that, and I'm sure that I have, I just have to weigh that against somebody else saying, I thought that the exercises were really great. Like, for example, I'm sure that you got positive feedback from the same group, right?
Yeah.
And you just got one that was really negative. So you'd be able to just, it's like, well, of course, somebody's not going to enjoy it. Because you're upsetting the balance of a normal classroom. You're doing something unusual. There's somebody, like, there's this whole possibility of making everyone happy. There's just
It's unrealistic. Yeah, no, and that's something that's why I'm glad I just shared it, because again, Miriam's saying here too, because many students only like sitting there doing nothing, and they're used to that. And it's not maybe that they necessarily that they like it. It's just that it is the easiest way, even if it's. And I have volunteered in the public schools, so I've seen a little bit of this, of what a typical classroom, or at least in a couple of the places in Casablanca, look like. And
We were always just sitting,
What?
I mean, many of the classes are just for sitting, and doesn't change.
The thing
And then when they
why?
come into a class to move around and talk more and be more productive, the easiest way out would be to criticize you and say that you wasted their time with their bad out as just one person saying that. The rest of the class would like it because the rest of the class are probably hardworking people and ambitious.
Yeah.
But then you'd still feel crushed, even if it's just one student.
Wait, say that last part again.
And still, you would still feel crushed, even if it's just one student who criticized you, like just one bad
We're
opinion.
moving upstairs. It's getting late. The folks are
just ever type that for me.
Sure. Well, I'm going to actually put, there we go. Can close that. Put Miriam up here. You can sit right there. There she is.
I'm sorry, could you type that very last thing that you said about the one student?
Okay.
I was going to type back, but yeah, but that's just me. That's a problem that's bigger than teaching. It's just me being of, of not having a thick enough skin, and just not in life as well, just not taking criticism very well. I'm getting much better about it. I really am, but it's taken me a long time to not take things necessarily so personally. And it should, but now, instead of just evaluating at the end, I'm trying to get the students involved at the very beginning. And so the experiment that I want to do, because I feel pressured to do 5 units sometimes it's 6 units in the book in a 10-week class. I never felt like it's adequate time for any of the units. So I give the students a quiz at the beginning where they look at the book and try to discuss. So they familiarize themselves with the topics. So what I want to do, I'm not sure if the director's comfortable with this yet. I'm going to talk to him about it again before I do it. But where the students choose the topics that they're most interested in talking about from the book, and then we spend our class time on those, and then we don't spend the 2 or 3 units maybe that they're not interested in or they don't feel are relevant to them. Since I don't make the exam, I'll give them some kind of work that they can do outside of class, and then we'll spend more time talking about the topics that they're interested in. So we go much deeper than and we have time to go much deeper than what the book's doing. Because my favorite activities are where the student's running the class and the other students are questioning them about something, and I'm just sort of out of the way recording language, and they know I'm there, but they're not paying attention to what I'm doing. And then when they're done talking, they've forgotten about me in a sense. And then when they're done talking, then we turn and look at the language that they've come up with, and they're usually quite shocked at all the stuff that they produced. And I always focus on here's the things that you said that were great. I wouldn't change a thing. And then here are some things that weren't quite, what did you mean exactly by this? And then they try to fix it. And then if not, I'll help at that point. And then then the next student is going up and doing a similar task, but they've got the opportunity of using that language that's on the board behind them. And it's great. It just, anything I can do where if I've set it up well, then they don't notice me after a while. And I'm just there periodically if there's a problem, and to keep them on task. But if it's a cool activity, they're going to stay on task without me. It's just important to feedback on what they're actually saying and trying to fix some of that, so they walk out of it with the sense that I haven't just talked and expressed meaningful things, but I've gotten some feedback on ways that I could say that more effectively.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah. So I would like to do away with the textbook as well, but I know that's gonna, they're not gonna do that anytime soon. So this seemed like a reasonable compromise. You're coming here, you're paying the money for the class, so here's what the school has decided are the units that we're going to talk about. So of those, choose the ones that you're interested in. It seems like a really simple thing. I mean, I wish I had done it earlier, but part of the reason is just that, and I think part of my supervisor is concerned about is he thinks that it's going to be somehow misused by the staff. Jamal was talking about that he's not allowed to bring in non-native speakers. Is that right? Any extra people outside of class, and I was going to ask him about why that is, because taking his Skype lesson, I brought a student. He's actually my roommate, but he's a filmmaker, and he's worked with really well-known Moroccan filmmakers. Hisham Lasri, what's the other guy? Nabil Ayouch, is that his name? Yeah. Anyway, and in the book was talking about describing a process and about filmmaking. So I told them in a class in advance, I just said, hey, I'm going to have someone come in who knows a lot about Moroccan cinema and about making movies, and you can ask him anything you want. And he just came in for about 20 minutes, and they just came up. He talked a little bit about what he did, maybe 2 or 3 minutes, and they just sat and came up with questions. And in the questions, it was the most meaningful 25 minutes of the 10 weeks up to that point by far. And it was such a simple thing of just bringing in somebody that they were interested in talking to, and then using language that was meaningful. And then we tied it back into the book by having them talk a little bit about the steps of what he talked about in making a movie. And then it turned into, okay, now you describe something that you can do well and tell us how to do it. And then I brought 2 students in for each class. We didn't spend more than 20 minutes on it each class because we had other things to do. But that way I could keep bringing the language back of, okay, now it's Jamal's turn, and now it's Joel's turn. And they would come up and describe the thing that they knew how to do, and we would listen for the steps. And then we'd talk a little bit about, did we understand the order of what they did? And then we'd have them say it again, and then we would come back with questions about, well, are there any steps that are missing, or do we agree with the order of the steps that you... And it produced all this great language, because then suddenly they were respectfully disagreeing with each other, and so all of that language came up. So it was way more than just using the present passive, which was the book's grammatical goal, but it was them sharing things that they cared about and wanted to teach each other a little bit about, and them respectfully criticizing what they were, or challenging their thoughts. And they did that kind of on their own without me having to set it up that much. And I thought that was great, and it just felt really meaningful. And so to hear that he's not allowed to do that anymore, and all I can think of is why?
The thing is I think what they're trying to do is
just come in and watch it and see if you think it works.
Well, to be fair, because I think the thing is they want a lesson. They want to see.
Fine.
Yeah,
I'll show you.
Sure.
I mean,
Sure. And I think once there's an explanation for what's happening, they're going to feel a lot more comfortable with these ideas. They're just not comfortable with the idea of I'm doing stuff and I'm not running it by anybody first.
Oh, but I am. I mean, I always talk to the director,
Mm-hmm.
and he just says, "Okay, hey, I'd like to see it." And then you come on in, just walk in, and I'll tell you what I'm doing. I'll show you in advance.
No, sure. I would always love for them to see it.
That's sort of what
I think. In this front, the native speaker part. I still don't quite get why that's changing. But I think it's going to come back in time. What's going to happen now is that things move back, and so it's all going to be reintroduced. I think so that the whole school can participate.
Okay.
Bring people in.
Well, let's hope that happens.
Yeah, I don't think they're trying to set the clock back. I mean, it's actually going to be the opposite. It's going to let's take away everything and start putting it in.
Well,
I think.
So did they watch any of your classes though before they made that decision? Or?
Somebody did.
Okay. Oh.
Somebody was watching. No.
That's unfortunate. Yeah. I do think this is why people end up making their own school. They get tired of working within these constraints, and they have an idea and they've seen it work, and they know that more of it. I'd just like to have a. This was also when I was briefly in an administrative position that I had trouble was I was looking for teachers who were, it wasn't just a job. I wanted people who were passionate about it, because then professional development would be something that they were committed to, and they wouldn't see me as, they wouldn't view me as an enemy, but somebody who was just trying to assist them in constantly thinking about what they were doing and getting better and trying to get better at what they were doing. And that we all have our professional concerns, and they're different as we continue as teachers. And I'll always be there. I guess I've been doing it for a while now, but I'm still interested in it, and there's still so much more to know. And if it weren't that, if I had just felt like I had mastered it, I would have given it up a long time ago. I think, as much as I like interacting with the students, I would have, the personal challenge wouldn't have been enough for me. It would have been, it's humbling for me, and this is why I would never, I think I'll never have an attitude about these people who, I've been doing it 20 years or 25, and they're like,
Do you
done.
use like as a student, when it comes time for you to learn things, how do you feel comfortable learning?
Well, this is interesting because nobody ever taught me French the way that I teach English, and so I really enjoy the classroom environment, but I've never been in one.
Never been in a classroom like the one you created.
Yeah. And so I always wish that the ALC they do Arabic and Fez, but they don't. No, I think in Mohammedia they do French classes. So maybe I could go over there and be taught French and just see if the way that they're teaching French is at all mirroring the ways that they're teaching English.
Mm-hmm.
So I like being in a class. I like people telling me homework to do and having deadlines imposed. And this is the same way when I'm doing a master's right now in TESOL at Hamlin University. And I have these hard deadlines. I mean, I can negotiate a little
How
bit.
did you enjoy the way that the CELTA program was organized?
Well, I didn't do the CELTA, but I did the Delta. This is something we could have talked about yesterday, was the fact that the class is extremely stressful.
Yeah.
And how much of a contradiction that is with the kind of classroom that you're trying to set up for your students. And my thought was, why are we going through this stressful process?
In order to create a stress-free class.
Yeah, it just seemed like and their attitude is this almost attitude of attrition, like, yeah, Jamal, you think you're tough enough? Like, as though we're in the military.
That is exactly what the guy who came from Oxford.
They're sort of proud of that fact.
He said that. He said that the CELTA was kind of the equivalent of boot camp.
And that's the way they describe the Delta, and they do. It's a breaking down of whatever you're doing.
Civilian behavior.
Yeah, they completely reprogram you, and they seem to take. Can you do that without making me feel terrible as a person? Especially someone like me who doesn't take criticism very well. I'm doing what I was taught how to do, and then the first lesson I do, and they're like, "Okay, fine, but why are you doing that?" And I'm like, "No." So
You want to try?
yeah, and then no,
You want a bottle?
it was tough, and then they just dragged, and I got into task-based learning from that, and then just did my own versions of it. But so it was, but I just don't think it doesn't have to be that way. It could be some very supportive, nurturing kind of thing
Could it?
Yeah. I mean, no. I mean, if you gave me the same material, I could make it that way. I'm sure I could.
See, we don't know though, do we? Because nobody does it. CELTA and Delta are done the way you just described it. It's just brutal.
Well, and this is a big criticism, I would say, of that system, is that
Well, it's a criticism by the people who are
it's all
taking
handed.
it, not by the designers of it. I think the designers of that, I mean, in its favor, they get the job done, don't they? I mean, you have a hard time getting those things that they teach you out of your system. I think you kind of just automatically create the kind of classroom they expect you to create.
Well, yeah, I think that's true,
It's
but
like a Manchurian candidate.
But this is kind of interesting, Miriam, too, is that from a teaching standpoint, we plan things and we think certain things are going to be meaningful, and the thing that I find is that what the students remember sometimes is often not at all related to what I thought they would remember about the lesson. And so, and the only reason I know this is that students have come up to me later, because I'll go away I'll leave the country for a year, and then I'll come back, and they're in a higher level, and they'll say, oh, I remember your beginning 5 class, and I remember when you were talking about this, and I remember the lesson, but I realized that the focus of what I was doing was on something else. And I mean, that was something incidental that had come up, but they still remembered that part of it. And it's sort of a reminder of, we don't always, what we think is going to be meaningful sometimes isn't, and the unexpected is more. Okay. Oh, sorry. And the unexpected is sometimes, or it's just interesting that the effect you have on people you don't even really realize, and what the things that they're going to focus on are quite a bit different than things that you thought they might be interested in or focused on. Should we make our own school? So she's. No, it's still kind of germinating in my head, and where I want to do it, really.
I think it would be a great achievement, though, to just get more people on our side.
Within the existing institution,
the ACA has a lot of political capital. They can get stuff done that we couldn't.
They certainly have the financial resources.
They have more financial resources, more connections, years and years of networks with worthwhile folks all over the place.
True.
Governments, universities. What do you got? Soldier?
Yeah, no, I was just thinking, though, that I wouldn't do it here in Morocco. I wouldn't. Because okay, so this is another thing, is that a lot of what Jamal and I are talking about, if you start theorizing, you start reading about the theory and where this stuff came from, it's all been around for half a century or more. Task-based learning, it's, the early 70s for sure, probably mid-60s. And yet, I observe a lot of teachers, and
like
almost...
when he says mid-70s, he means from year 0, like 70s. Because, I mean, if you think about it, this is something ancient.
It's old. It's
task-based.
It's all really old, yeah. And you read Diane Lush and Freeman, Techniques and Principles of Language Teaching. Like, she talks about where grammar translation came up and all the other audiolingual or all those ideas, and what a sample class would look like. And that's what I got the workshop idea of. Let's take the same lesson and do it 4 different ways. And I think the rest of my
the circus thing.
Well, no, that was the Wooing thing. This is the one that came after. I don't think you were there at that conference, but it kind of bombed. My part of it bombed, but the other two just. I was trying to do silent. It didn't work, but I've done it in class where I'm just pointing to stuff and then making language, and then the fails. The problem with silent learning is that I've only seen it done in open class, and I thought, how can I make that mistake? And I didn't listen to doing that. So I just didn't work when I was trying to do it.
I'm assuming there are videos online.
There are, but you always seem to do the same stuff. To me, there are lots of.
Okay, let's keep talking about what we were supposed to learn here at TESOL. So, what was another conference that you attended?
I don't know if I can remember anything at this point.
Oh
no. I need to go look back through the program, and then it's like look through the descriptions of things, and I've put a little X through the things that I wanted to attend, and I took notes in the back. Actually, my notes would help me get thinking again. But I don't know if I have any more at this point. I don't.
Here's something that'll interest you, Miriam, and I think for probably anybody who's interested in changing things at school is that they're teaching. They have a way. They have a way to grade another student.
Yeah.
Right, you said you think this is bogus.
Well, I'll tell you why in a minute. But so you want to look at a little bit of the. So what is this? What is it? Independent speaking rubrics? Integrated speaking.
Yes. Yeah. Integrated.
Yeah. Well, here, this is independent on this side and integrated on this side.
Oh.
Strange. Okay, look at this. Okay, so we'll go ahead, Jamal, and then I'll tell you why
What
this
did
is
I get out of
problematic.
this?
Yeah.
Well, I like the idea that first off, this kind of rubric here, the rules for grading somebody's speaking, this is called the holistic way. Now, there's another way that's just called the analytic way of grading it, and you just check things off, right? So as you're listening to someone, if you say to yourself, okay, generally well-paced, check, demonstrates effective use of grammar, check, and you're checking things the whole time. And then you give the person a grade from 0 to 4, except they said never give anyone a 0. It's just 1 through 4. And always, no 3.5 or 2.5. What's cool about this system is that you have 6 or 7 people who rate you as a speaker, not
One
or
two.
So one teacher wouldn't be enough. How could that be done in class? You'd have to have a modified version of it, or you just have to maybe see what compare your own assessment to, say, your best student's assessment of another person's speaking.
Yeah, okay, that would work. Or you could pull a couple of Skype people and then have them in class.
And it's not that hard. Once you
up.
hear somebody speaking,
Well, this is the thing. So if he and I were, for example, grading someone's speech, see, here's my problem with this: is that look how detailed
yes.
the description is. Now, the more detailed this gets, the harder it becomes to interpret. In terms of when you're listening to a student, and okay, for example, so here's delivery. A score of 4 in delivery means generally well-paced flow, fluid expression, speech is clear. It may include minor lapses or minor difficulties with pronunciation or intonation patterns which do not affect overall intelligibility. Now, okay, between that and a 3, okay, maybe I record the speech and I play it back and I sit there, it would take me forever to really properly interpret that. Do I have the time to do that? Not necessarily. And my sense is that despite all of this, we have 4 through 0, that if I threw this out completely and I just said to Jamal, 4 is the best and 0 is the worst. Okay, we're going to bring in, we could go with who we think is our best speaker based on class, but even if I didn't tell him at all about what was contained in this, and I just said 4 is the best, 0 is the worst, he would listen for 5 minutes, and I would listen for 5 minutes, and on maybe accuracy, fluency, vocabulary, the traditional things that they judge people on speaking exams on, I could just turn to him and say, okay, write down your scores, I'll write down mine, and I guarantee you we'd be within a half point of each other on every one of them.
Yes.
And so the question then becomes, do I need this really detailed description of what a 4 to a 0 is? When I know that we're going to be within, and if we're not, then we're going to discuss about, hey, why did you give them such a low grade there where I gave them a higher one? And then we might get into connecting it to this. Like, okay, well, because I thought she hesitated quite a bit, or whatever, and she would give me some reasons for it. He would give me some reasons for that. And then it might be something that we have in common that we can use as a means to discuss and adjust our scores. That's fine. But when I'm watching, I can't be looking at this and listening to you in any kind of meaningful way. I have to be just listening to you. I've got an idea of what this is asking me to do, but I can't interpret that while I'm listening to you talk in 5 minutes. It just doesn't work. I've never been able to do that. I don't really know anybody that could. And so I think this is the great part about rubrics that no one wants to talk about, is it's here for some transparent, you can say, look, here's the way you're being evaluated. But when we get right down to actually what this means, it's really messy and subjective. But even despite that, I know our scores would be relatively similar, even if no matter how we wrote what a 4 meant versus what a 0 meant. And some people would say I'm completely wrong about that, but that's my feeling about rubrics.
Well, at the same time, we have to find where you grade people, right? You give.
Yeah, it has to be there, but it should be. It's going to have to be. It can't be this long. It can't. It has to be. It has to be easier. Or again, we only refer to it when there are big discrepancies between our scoring. There has to be a second person, for sure, because this is subjective, no matter how objective it was. It's subjective when you're trying to apply it to a minute and a half conversation with a student, for example, if you're doing it in an oral way. There's no other way to do it. But my interpretation of the language is going to be ultimately different from this. And that could affect the way that I would score someone. So even though this appears to be an objective thing, there's no way that it ultimately can. But then we can at least point to it and say, well, this is what we're trying to, how we're trying to interpret it. No one's comfortable saying that.
See, I think this is embarrassing. You know what? Because I'm just thinking about, she's a medical student. Can you imagine if medical schools allowed themselves to kind of slack that language teachers? And you know what I mean? Yeah. It's just like there's just so much like, oh yeah, we haven't figured this one out yet. You know? Somebody else is performing laser surgery to break up a kidney stone in somebody else's stomach, and somebody else is like, I still can't quite figure out how to give you a grade for your speech.
Yeah, well, but it's, again, the consequences are quite a bit different, and in the fact of, because let's ask you, Miriam, then, do you
any other field, like, and we go to these lectures, and I can't imagine, I can't imagine an astrophysicist conference being like this.
Okay, but think about this in terms of surgery. Okay, so the patient died there, so you got a 0, right? So the beautiful sutures there, and you did a really good job with the cut, and it's just exact. It's like art. That's 4. but you wouldn't evaluate it that way. It wouldn't be meaningless to you to evaluate it that way. So I guess this is both my parents are physicians, and I don't think I've ever asked them this question then. So what? When you're, if you were teaching someone surgery, what they're watching, I would assume they're sitting in there watching a guy do it a couple times, yeah,
I don't think they just give a guy a scalpel and say, go get him, Tiger. Wink. It's okay. We didn't like this guy anyway. Don't worry about it.
You need your gallbladder out. We're gonna give you a discount and have you operated on by a student. He's never really done one of these by himself, but we're gonna test on you and evaluate him afterward. But how do they make the jump? They eventually, the guy doesn't have the scalpel in their hand. He's not doing it for them. Like, make a cut here. Or,
yeah. Well, that's what I'm saying. I feel like our field is very emotion driven rather than reason driven and results and stuff driven. Like we are not as affected by data, even though we should be. As other fields are.
But now that I'm thinking about it, though, the last time I had surgery, I had a tree branch fell on me in summer 2013 while I was cycling. After a storm, just fell on me and hit me in the head while I had a helmet on, knocked me off the bike, and I broke my collarbone. And the interesting thing is, I got a second opinion, and I found a doctor who was actually a cyclist like me, and he went in and did the operation. But he had an assistant, and she actually did certain parts of the operation. So she was kind of the assistant. He did, I think, the major functions of the operation, but she actually did the sewing up and the cutting and that sort of thing. So it was this very hands-on training thing. I mean, I know she's done more of these before, but he's clearly the more experienced person that she was learning from. And my mom is a physician's assistant, and she was really impressed by the job that she did on the cut, because they had to put this titanium plate in with 7 pins, and then they took it out about a year ago. And so they had to go in the same spot and cut twice, And my mom's, so I went up to her after, when she was the consultant after the post-op, when they took the sutures out or they removed whatever they
and they cleaned the wound and everything. And I said, "Oh, my mom wanted me to tell you that, she thought you did a really good job of sewing," and she had the same pride that a teacher might have when you said, "Hey, I really like that." I said, it was that same thing where how often do you get complimented on that sort of thing? Like, "Hey, I really thought you did just something that only another physician might notice."
Oh, right, right.
But she did do a good job, and it made her happy. I think I made her day by telling her that, by relaying that little fact. But so I guess I could answer my own question. There is this hands-on. He's telling her what to do, but I don't know if, like, "Oh, you botched the cut. Like, how do we fix that?" I don't know what. The consequences are so much more severe for someone not doing it correctly.
Yeah, they're looking for surgery.
Surgery
Sure.
versus teaching. It's like if
Teaching
you have
English.
a bad lesson, it's like, okay, yeah, the students might go home dissatisfied, but no one's
Sure.
life is harmed.
And another thing I think we should say is like we're getting lots and lots of advice, and there aren't a lot of recorded examples of. Well, maybe I just need to search YouTube more. There aren't a lot of recorded examples of this is just a teaching method that works, or this is classroom management that works in 95% of situations. Do this. It's just a lot of guesswork, and again, it's like, okay, just go in there and do it.
There's just a little bit of marked intent you wanted me to do, and I haven't done it, was wanted just to show new teachers short in-class videos of, okay, here's the teacher setting up, and he wanted me to do it, but like setting up a quick pair work thing and how to give instructions and check. And the guy today was doing that, where the general, I don't know if you want to hear about this, but the general thing is you give instructions, you model the activity, and then the third thing is you sort of check with the students to see if they understand. I've always found this a little patronizing, especially in the high levels. Like, so how many questions do I want you to answer? It just seems a little bit
Information
insulting.
check question.
Yeah.
Right?
So what I do is I do the first two, because I'm interested in the pace of the class is extremely important to me. And there's a certain art to making things go just long enough and too short. But so I give the model, I give the instructions. Or excuse me, I give the instructions in the model. And then in a class of 20, there might be a pair or two that don't get it. Fine. Everybody else just start working. I'll go over to them and fix it. I don't want to hold up the whole class because two pairs don't understand. And so I find it kind of maddening.
Joel,
He was doing that to us today, and I was like, okay, I know why you're doing that, but I hate that. And I've got it.
Right.
But the SALTA says do it that way.
SALTA says do it that way, and I think it works better for language learners. They don't mind those tasks. I think it's just kind of like they can do it, and any opportunity to get something is not passed up. So I'm with you. I don't like those kind of exercises myself, but I think that classes where it's like, okay, he just asked me this, and I have the answer for that, they feel good about answering it.
Yeah, no, that is true. You're absolutely, and I've watched teachers, and I think they do it well without being patronizing. It's just that for me,
we don't really.
Yeah, for me it just felt like an extra step. And there are times I pride myself on clear instructions, but there are times where I go in there and I've planned out what I want to say. That's what.
But also don't forget, some of the people who are sitting in the audience are kind of struggling a little bit too. Some of these teachers they're kind of lost. Some of them.
Yeah, sure, but I mean,
I don't understand all of the teachers when they're asking questions and stuff. Their pronunciation and everything is just really, their accents are super thick, and they don't seem to understand what's going on. I mean,
we talked about this before, but just I think the general thing is that, and this is funny probably for you to hear in your end, is that when you're trying to train other teachers, they are the worst people at following instructions. They know how to give them, but they have no idea. You give them the simplest instructions, like, hey, this worked with my beginning 5 class, and yet I've got fluent speakers here who are like, huh, what? But I think it's also that they're used to going to presentations and not.
Yes. Yes.
They're just always talking about something. Oh, okay, what? Oh, I got to do something. Wait,
right.
I was checking my Facebook or
whatever. Right. Or talking to their friend.
Right. And you were trying to break that in your.
And I tried to stomp on everybody.
There's another workshop, teaching confrontational. Jamal Morelli, shaking students out of lethargy, or shaking other teacher trainees out of lethargy. Yeah, so,
no, this is next year's presentation.
Given we're just, endless ideas. I like gossip.
Yeah.
But I got you.
Bringing building bridges by burning.
But what he was doing, and I told him later what I liked about it, is when I have a rapport with the students, I feel more comfortable playing devil's advocate, of challenging what they're saying, and saying, just gently going, I don't think that's a good idea. And then they kind of, their interest in defending themselves and saying, no, you're wrong, but then they start forgetting about their concern about making mistakes. Their desire to communicate is much stronger than their worry about how it's going to sound. And so when people, some people say that the traditional way of there's even SLA research on the second language acquisition research that people that had a drink or two were more, or they were less inhibited, and therefore they felt like their language production was better. I would say that this, for me, with my French, is when someone makes me angry, like a taxi driver is trying to rip me off, then it's just coming right out of me, the French. And I'm not even thinking about, I know I'm making errors, but the message is getting across. And so I find that when I'm upset, it's easier for me to speak a foreign language. And that if I can do this in a slightly gentler way in class, I don't want to anger people, but I want them to be challenged enough that they want to say to me, no, you're wrong, and here's why. And then they're using the language, and the mission's been accomplished.
So let's finish with what we learned today, and then that's it. We'll have something back.
What time? How late are you? Like an insomniac, or are you? What time is it? It's like 5 hours ahead, right? I mean, you're. It's like pushing 4 a.m. Is that right?
It's 4. It's 4 a.m.
Okay, so. Wow. I'm impressed. Anyway, I'm. Wow. So what happens tomorrow? You don't have to be up early, I hope, for anything.
No, I don't. No.
Yeah, me too. Well, I'm still on Moroccan time. I've only been here for about 48 hours. So, and I have trouble sleeping, so my body has no idea what time it is right now. I mean, even though it says 10 to 11, it's it's like 3.
Yeah, it's time for you to go to bed, Miriam. We will shut off in a few minutes. See, we both had the idea that we just kind of push everything out that we got exposed to, so that there was for me, is kind of a sense of accountability for why we're here at all, why there are events like this.
Well, and this is the
giant expensive events like this.
And this is probably a way that Jamal and I work slightly differently. I think I take a lot longer to process things, and so the way that I will do a workshop on something that I've decided to try out in class, and if it works, or it didn't work, but I'll find something that worked, I'll adjust it, but then I'll eventually make a workshop out of it, and I'll credit the person who gave me the idea, and then sort of how I changed it, and that's the way it works for me. And that might not happen for another few weeks because I have to do some experimentation in class with it, and so that's the way that I'm going to give back whatever it is I think I've picked up. I'm still thinking about it right now, and I'm really tired, so it's harder for me to process information and really articulate what I'm thinking about and what I'm concerned about. But the other aspect of it is I just need more time to think about it, and I will continue to think about it. But the way that what we have in common is, I think, I need to do it quickly. So as soon as I get back to class, I'm going to try this stuff out from day one. We've already come up with a few research ideas that I want to try. The one, and I have to write this down or I'm going to forget it, he was talking about doing one where, and I think you were here for that, but it was a whole class where the teacher sets up the activities maybe ahead of time, but the students have a degree of flexibility and they can work on their own without the teacher interfering at all. The teacher can just come in if they've got some issues or they're not sure about something. And I've done this in class, and I've done it in isolated lessons, but could you do it for a whole 10 weeks, and would you get different results from the same level of classes? Doing one the traditional way, and one where the students are doing everything themselves, but the teacher has set up the plan. I'd be very interested in seeing if that... And so then the research would be, does student autonomy achieve better results, or, in terms of position, or, I don't know. I mean, there are ways that you could frame that.
Well, we do know that there's got to be, we have to be able to get in there and guide them to proper language use. That's not, they're not going to be able to get the right language without somebody who's
no, and that's where you come in. But I mean, you're not standing up there in the front, and they're working and they're trying to solve issues.
Maybe the way that they would solve stuff too is, again, you'd have some authentic material, a little bit like what that guy, the Brazilian guy, was talking about today. That you kind of insist, it's like, well, this is your course material, so I expect you to use this as part of your class.
Yeah.
So that there's lots of cases where there's authentic language modeling going, like they're listening to video clips and
and that could be all happening though in the context of the activities are there for them to do. It's just like, hey, turn this on and flip this and watch the first 40 seconds of it, and the instructions are all there. But it doesn't have to be see, I'll just tell you this one thing and I'll let you go because I know you gotta go to bed. But what Jamal said that's always stuck with me as well, it's a great reminder, is there, when you're designing an activity, is there a way that the students could do this without you? Is there a way that you can remove yourself from the process and have them doing it and teaching, and that way, again, as an instructor, then you can sit and focus on things that you can't focus on when you're actually standing up doing it. And one of them for me is listening and recording the lesson. So, anyway. Thanks for hanging out. It was great to read your thoughts too. I'm kind of moved by a number of things that you wrote. I'd like to make a copy of this.
Yeah, sure. I'll send it to you.
Take some of the language and just because it's good to get feedback from people that have gone through the system as well. Because I don't spend enough time doing this, so it was very valuable for me as well to get your thoughts and ideas. Sleep well, and hopefully we'll get a chance to do it on a future date. Good night.
Okay then. Good night.
Good night. Bye-bye.